Okay, ladies and gentlemen, where's our audience? What are we, chopped liver? We are reconvening the 103rd meeting of the Gaming Commission at about 11:30. We'll go for half an hour to an hour, and then we will take a break for lunch. We are going to do a little changing of the agenda sequence. Just for everybody's information purposes, we're going to do first research and problem gambling with the HIA from Western Mass. Then we're going to do the racing division. Then we're going to do administration, item number 8. And then we're going to do licensing, Director Acosta. And last would be the legal division with General Counsel Blue. So let's go to item number 4. Let's go to item number 3 on our agenda, which is approval of the minutes. Commissioner McHugh.
The minutes, Mr. Chairman and colleagues, are in the book. I would move their adoption as they're contained with the normal exception for typos and matters of syntax.
Second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Item number 4, research and problem gaming. We will be led by Director Van der Linden.
Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, so I think that this is a very timely agenda item, especially following the MGM presentation. At hand is the question of, well, what is the impact of a proposed casino in Western Massachusetts? This was a key question that was asked by community members in Springfield, community members throughout Western Massachusetts. As you know, very well know, it's also an important question that we're asking within the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. From the spring of 2013 to the fall of 2013, Partners for a Healthier Community engaged a wide range of stakeholders, including myself, including Dr. Rachel Volberg, to conduct a Western Massachusetts Casino Health Impact Assessment, which is in your binders there. This was an impressive effort that was led by the two folks next to me, Kathleen Segda and Frank Robinson. They are here today to tell you more about that process, about what the findings were, and about what their recommendations were. The report was funded by Robert Wood Johnson and the Pew Charitable Trust. It was just released earlier this month, so they're excited to get this out and to start spreading the news about what the process was and where they want to go with it. So I'm not going to take too much time. I want to turn it over to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
I'm going to go first. I'm going to try and sort of set the stage, a little bit of context, and then Kathleen is going to really take over the bulk of the report. Was the director and sort of drove this process, and will bring that deep investment of time and energy to the conversation, and I'll piggyback comments where appropriate. So I want to thank the commission, Chairman Crosby and the commissioners for your support in getting this started. When I presented an idea around looking at the potential health impacts of the casino, it was through your conversation, our conversation with Pew, that I think gave our application an added boost. And that really speaks to why this is different than what you just heard from the casino presenters. They're talking about a design that's really pretty attractive and I think pretty powerful. We're different than Sigma as well in that we're looking to provide data and information in advance of a decision to inform the process. So that's where we are a bit different than what Rachel and the UMass team are doing. Actually, in some ways, we are setting the stage for them. We're providing some baseline data and sort of setting up some targets I hope that Sigma will actually be able to follow up on. So again, I wanted to make that distinction, and the best way to make it is Springfield just completed this phenomenal redesign of State Street. They built this pathway from the bottom of the State Street all the way up the top 2 or 3 miles, but they did not design a bike lane. The buildings, the way they're sited, don't make the sidewalks really walkable. So they really didn't do that design. It's a great product, great solution, but they didn't do it with health in mind. And so there's a public health missing element. And to the extent to which the law that establishes the Gaming Commission is chock full of public health language, it made this health impact assessment really something very important for us. So I'm going to touch briefly on what is an HIA. Again, I've made the comment it's proactive. And like the work that Sigma's doing, it sits on top of data. It's a systematic process. We begin with a series of steps with the community. It's really grounded in assessment and scientific data. So in our meetings, we would often get suggestions from the advisory committee around what to include, and we would say, well, the assessment doesn't bear that out, and we can't find the data, the scientific data to support that action or recommendation. Therefore, we can't really speak to that within the report. So again, we're very similar to Sigma, very similar to the work that you heard previously, but we have an additional bar, and that bar requires that we actually ground this in assessment data and in science. If you take a look at our process, it's been really about a year long. It's actually been February through November. In some ways too short, but we're driven by the timeline that the law has established. Again, our aim is to inform the decisions that you have to make and those that the operator has to make and the city has to make. Therefore, we need to follow your timeline. So it's a very ambitious process. You can take a look at the lead partners. We're the lead agency. We're involved with UMass as a partner, both Rachel Volberg as well as members on our project management team. The process and the plans initiated by and engaged, I'm having trouble talking, losing my voice. It's initiated by us, but engaged fully with the community. In the scoping process, the community drives us, tells us where to go. And that community, along with an advisory board, really shapes this process. So if you look at our advisory board hit list, so to speak, a good portion of the folks that were here earlier were members of the advisory board that provided input into this process. UMass, Chamber of Commerce, you can look at the list that's in front of you. We had members from West Springfield and Palmer on this advisory board as well in the beginning because they were actually in the running for a casino. Is there anyone critical there that we want to cover, to be sure we covered them?
So we made sure that we had representatives from a wide variety of sectors, so nonprofit, health, business community, but then also representatives from each of the potential host communities, so we were able to do that as well.
As you read the full report, you'll note that there are a whole range of other players, actors in the process that aren't even listed there. So as we would gather data, we would vet it with content matter experts across the state. So this report is full of expert advice and direction. So the scoping said that we really wanted to look at a whole lot of stuff. The practical reality of time frame and dollars force us to really track health issues in 4 subject areas. And we're going to speak to those specifically, and that's what's covered in the report. Jobs and employment, the access to gambling itself, traffic, crime and public safety. And they're not very different than what you heard earlier from the presenters. The difference being is that we are trying to understand what the health impact is very precisely. How do you mitigate some of the potential risks or threats? Then how do you strengthen some of the positives? And again, the point I'll make, and then I'm going to pass this off to Kathleen, just to give you an example of the conversation we had with some folks from Pioneer Valley Planning Commission that was looking at transportation. And in order not to be duplicative, I called Tim Brennan. I said, Tim, what are you guys doing? How can we help? I said, by the way, are you looking at the health impacts of transportation? He says, no, we're not. I said, well, we are, so we'll add that to our profile. We'll provide that data, which is not a duplication, but really, to my point, bringing a different lens to the same data that the casino operators are presenting and then other planners are presenting. They often do it without that public health lens. Witness my State Street corridor story. Kathleen, why don't you take over now?
And then the other item was that because of resource and time constraints, we focus particularly on the impacts of Springfield, knowing that it would impact surrounding communities as well. So that's just a constraint that we had. So for the, I think you. So these are what we use to guide our research, and they're called pathways. And basically, I'm not going to go into detail, but we have one for each of the 4 topic areas. And really, it just walks through if a casino were to open, then in this case, jobs and employment, it would impact resort casino jobs, and then how subsequent impacts would impact health. And that's what we use to guide our research. So we had one of these for each of the different topic areas. And they're included in the report. I'm not going to go into detail. So this is for access to local casino gambling, which focus primarily on problem pathological gambling, traffic, and then crime and public safety. So as Frank mentioned, for our assessment, we reached out to quite a few different content and technical experts, both local, regional, and in some cases national, to solicit their input. So not only in terms of gathering information about what impacts and existing conditions would be, but also to different techniques and ideas around how to look at impacts. So now I'm going to walk through the report format for you. You have a copy in your binder, and then some of the findings that we have. And I'll do this quickly and just touch briefly on it. So there's the executive summary, and so that will give you an overview of everything in the report. The report's lengthy, so that might be useful to orient you. We have an introduction which provides an overview, but also includes a sociodemographic and health profile of potential host communities, so in this case, Springfield. We describe in detail the methods we used for our assessment. And then for each of the sections in assessment, so we did a section for each of the topic areas, jobs and employment, access to local casino gambling, etc. We provide an overview, which includes a summary of community input on that topic. We do a literature review to walk through each of those steps in the pathway and see what the literature says in terms of how it would, each step would impact and lead to a health impact. We describe the existing conditions relevant to that topic in the host community, and then we predict the impacts on the host community, so again, in Springfield. So take that information and really say, how would this impact Springfield? Based on our findings and extensive outreach back to community stakeholders and the experts, we developed recommendations, which is the next section, evidence-based and best practice to the extent possible, and then also monitoring indicators to follow up on those recommendations as well, many of which are directed at the Sigma team. And actually, and Rachel, again, was involved in our advisory committee and looking at some of those monitoring indicators. And then we go through strengths, limitations, and conclusion. So a few comments about the report before I move quickly into some of the findings we have and recommendations. When we developed our recommendations, you'll see that some of the recommendations relate to strategies that are already being planned. So it may be things that the Gaming Commission already is planning, or the casino operator, or even the city. But community stakeholders wanted to really show support and that this was important and make sure that we promote that this actually be followed through on. So you'll see that. You also may see, in some cases, an enhancement of a planned strategy, and then in some recommendations, it's a new area where there are no current plans. And the recommendations are targeted to a variety of stakeholders. I'll go over them very broadly, some of them in a second, but there's much more detail in the full report. So recommendations, for example, targeted to the Gaming Commission, to the casino operator, host community, state agencies, et cetera. Okay, so quickly, some of the key findings for different topic areas, starting with jobs and employment. So some of this already was discussed by MGM earlier. So unemployment rates high in Springfield, approximately 11%. So the increase in number of jobs would be beneficial. Employment has a positive impact in health. One of the things that came up in our discussions, and as we learned more, was that there are local and regional barriers to obtaining and retaining entry-level positions that have been documented. So we determined this by reaching out to some of our local community experts in workforce development, but also by Federal Reserve Bank reports and other reports that have been documented. So these barriers, so examples are workforce readiness challenges, so even people that have the necessary education, challenges in retaining the position, but just due to lack of workforce readiness skills, limited public transit, so though Springfield does have the most extensive public transit in the region, it's limited, and particularly for shift work, it's raised as a barrier because of limited availability in the evening and weekend hours. So, and we also found that this could prevent those most in need from obtaining these jobs that would be coming up. We also found that the literature cites higher prevalence of health risk behaviors amongst casino employees. So that includes smoking, alcohol consumption, and problem gambling. And also shift work. So much of the resort casino jobs would be shift work, which is defined as non-standard hours, work hours. It's been found to negatively impact health. So some of our recommendations would be that the casino operator plan. And one of the things that I didn't go into detail about in the previous slide was that for the jobs to be most beneficial, hiring locally, and they've demonstrated a commitment to that, which is great. But given the workforce challenges, then how to actually make that commitment actually take place. So the casino operator plans to reach the targeted local hiring levels given these workforce issues that have been cited and barriers. So that's one of our recommendations. Funding for infrastructure for regional cross-sector collaboration to address the identified workforce barriers. And then also as a way to benchmark how we are doing on these things, monitoring and reporting of employment indicators around both diversity and equity. So the report has a strong focus on health equity, and then also where hired from, and to get at some of that local hiring and make this publicly available, which my understanding there is an intent to do that at this time. So in the area of access to local casino gambling and disordered gambling, key findings similar to things you probably are already aware of, that there's likely initial increase in disordered gambling, and that we, based on the evidence, estimated a 30% increase initially, but then the scientific literature indicates a decrease over time. There are certain populations that are vulnerable to disordered gambling. So Springfield, there's a large percentage of people that have those that are potentially vulnerable. So low income, and there's 27% of people living below the poverty level in Springfield, some communities of color, and so as you can see, over 50% are communities of color in Springfield, and then also young people. So the younger you start to gamble, the more likelihood that you'll have a problem later in life, and so a large number of young people in the area. And these groups already, some of them experience health inequities. There's large health disparities in Springfield and the county. So the potential that this could actually increase some of these health inequities. Also, we found that there was limited local capacity to identify and treat problem gambling, and then lack of understanding of the community as a serious disorder. Thanks. So what we had as recommendations, so similarly, create, funding, so to create an infrastructure for, again, regional cross-sector collaboration to address potential increases in problem gambling. And some of these strategies we recommend include a public awareness campaign. And then also, we recommend that these campaigns include a component that's targeted to vulnerable populations in a way that's accessible. So making sure the materials are both culturally competent, the reading level is appropriate, things like that. We also recommend that the Public Health Trust Fund supported disordered gambling training and certification for local providers due to the lack of the trained professionals in the area. Moving on, so another area we looked at is traffic. There was a discussion about potential increases in traffic, and so those increases have a potential to impact the community. Large portions of Springfield are environmental justice communities, and so meaning that, so the state defines that as communities where the criteria are where a large number are low income, communities of color, and then also immigrant or populations as well. And these are groups that are often disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards. So the intent is that to look at where, if these groups might be impacted. So if you look at the image on here, you can see that, and it's not very big, so it's probably hard to tell, and you can see this is included in the report, but we analyzed what potential vulnerable populations live along the proposed or likely casino routes and who would be impacted by near roadway air pollution, since using the traffic assessment data from the MGM's traffic report and then also their predictions around increase in traffic, we found that the levels on some of the local access roads would actually exceed thresholds potentially that could lead to health impacts. So Springfield already has very high hospitalization rates for asthma, which is also related to air pollution. So, and there are groups disproportionately affected, particularly Hispanics, Latinos, and also African Americans, and these groups would potentially be impacted as well. In addition, I already mentioned earlier, public transit, we found that though it's available, it's limited and could be a barrier as well. So our recommendations are, again, funding to create infrastructure for regional cross-sector collaboration to address these potential increases in traffic. The collaboration and others should promote use of public transportation and alternative methods of transportation. An example of this is that MGM in their traffic assessment had very detailed, there were detailed recommendations about traffic demand management, and so we recommend that those be implemented, things related to employee public transit promotion, all those types of things. And then also, because of that potential impact of these of community groups that are already feeling disproportionate impacts by some health conditions related to pollution, assessing the impact of near roadway pollution on some of these populations and developing strategies to mitigate the harms. And finally, the last topic area was crime and public safety. So in Springfield, crime rates are high, and also perception of crime is also high, and both of those associated with negative health impacts. Literature is conflicting on how a casino would actually impact crime, but it's been found that community environment and design, so things like lighting and promoting pedestrian walking and eyes on the street, have been found to actually affect actual crime rates and also decrease perception of crime. And so our recommendations relate to focusing on design strategies that would both prevent crime and increase perception of safety. And then finally, one of the other findings is that DUIs and alcohol-related fatalities may increase with accessibility to free alcohol at casinos. Studies have shown that this has happened in some cases. So recommendations relate to community policing, so joint ventures between local police and then also community members to police the neighborhoods. As I mentioned, community design strategies to prevent crime and enhance perception of safety, and then also strategies to prevent DUIs, public health campaign, and then also expanded sobriety checks, things along those lines. And then in addition, we have a series of general overall recommendations, and I'll go through that quickly. So basically, in terms of our general findings, there are regional needs that exist that would affect the extent to which a casino, the casino impacts are positive and negative. I went over them, things like workforce barriers, availability of public transportation, and this provides an opportunity, one, to address those, but it will, we won't have as much of a positive impact if it happens in silos. So really recommending integrating resort casino plans with those of other initiatives has the best potential to address existing regional needs. Also, we found that large existing health inequities currently exist, as I mentioned, in both Springfield and Hampden County, and that they could either be, in some cases, reduced or some cases exacerbated, depending on the strategies that are implemented during casino development and operation. So our recommendations, so one is to the Gaming Commission that consider in the application process and evaluation of the casino operators how the resort casino plans leverage existing resources and feed into integrated needs to address some of these existing regional needs that have been identified related to the areas the casino would impact. And then also the casino plans, operator plans to mitigate negative health impacts and promote health equity. So how to, as part of the evaluation process, consider, is there a potential to exacerbate, and is it being considered how that might be addressed? And then finally, the last recommendation was based on what I mentioned before, but also discussions with some folks around having the opportunity that this process can evolve, and that has the best opportunity over time to promote the most positive impact. So the Gaming Commission, so create a transparent, dynamic process that ensures continued collaborative work between the licensed casino operator, municipalities, community organizations, et cetera, during casino development and operation. And the process should allow for data-driven evaluation and modification of activities over time to ensure that stated goals are being achieved. So basically, are things working to, the way that they are intended to create job opportunities and promote employment amongst under and unemployed, to mitigate problem gambling. So making this data publicly available on impacts, is it working? And then if it's not, evaluating it and then developing modifications to those strategies and allowing for the opportunity for reallocation of funding as necessary to support those strategies. So a flexible process. So thank you for taking the time to allow us to present on our report, and we'll be following up with the individual commissioners as appropriate based on interest after in the upcoming weeks. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions or thoughts?
Just a quick question. I know, Mark, you were involved, and since you've gotten here engaged with this team, is there information out of their report that is going to be helpful to you as you move forward with a number of the initiatives you've undertaken?
Yeah, I think there would be.
Good answer.
Certainly, and when I think about, how do we strategically move forward, and it's not just the commission, it's the Department of Public Health, Health and Human Services, and a number of other stakeholders. What are the recommendations in here that also can be rolled out with them? How can we integrate it into kind of our leadership on these issues as well? And a perfect example of that, I think, is when we talk about the Mass Council on Compulsive Gambling, their annual conference, and we start talking about what is our strategy within the framework to look at these community partnerships and relationships and evaluation. I think that this is important information that's already there, that's relevant specifically to Massachusetts, that we could bring forward and try to integrate that where appropriate.
Kathleen and Frank, since you finished up your work in roughly October, or maybe subsequent to that, because obviously some information got taken out with respect to communities that are no longer in the mix. Have you had a chance to go in and review the information that MGM has submitted online in their RFA2 application and see how that has matched up with some of the critical issue areas you've identified? See if they've
So-
addressed it. that part.
So I have not had a chance to do that yet. Honestly, the report was actually finalized end of December, beginning of January.
Okay.
But we did actually present a draft to MGM for their input and feedback at the end of November and took their comments into account into the report, but that was also a way to make sure that they received it in time to consider for their application. The plan is to go to look at what they've included, but also to reach out to them and discuss that with them as well.
Okay.
Yes, it's along similar veins. We'll be meeting with the mayor's staff and the Public Health Commission in Springfield to review the report as it maps to the host agreements and where we've provided detail that we think would be good implementation strategy as it relates to host agreement items. So we're hoping to map to that host agreement, plus also see if we can connect more specifically strategies and recommendations to to the city's work. The one area that is really was sort of a surprise, and I want to sort of maybe just sort of flag it, and I think this is something where the commission really has the ability to impact the whole state, since you're doing this for the whole state, and that is just how little people know about the seriousness of gambling or disordered gambling and gambling addiction. And so the notion of framing gambling as a social issue that will give the general public a different way of understanding and looking at it, I think is really important. And I would suspect if the general public saw it differently, through a different lens, that the data around disordered gambling would change pretty dramatically. So I think it's just people don't see it as a problem, even though it is a problem. So I think the commission has the ability to actually help reframe how it is the general public sees gambling addiction or problem gambling. So I think that was a big takeaway for me from the assessment work that we did with the local community.
Just to echo that, Frank, I think that that's spot on. And I think that there is some very concrete work that we need to be doing starting now on that front.
One of the, and maybe I missed it, but you talked about barriers to employment, some basic entry-level skills. Did access to childcare ever pop up as a barrier, especially when you're thinking that there's a 24/7 operations and some of you may wind up in a third shift? Childcare has to be a consideration. Did that pop up from the discussions you had as a barrier to employment for some folks?
I'm not sure.
So if I recall, I only touched on some of the barriers there, and in the report, actually, it only touches on some as well. So if I remember correctly, that was listed, but just not as high a barrier in one of the Federal Reserve Bank reports, where they reached out to community in particular to look at what the barriers were to entry-level employment in Springfield. So they talk about more barriers in depth in that report, and it's referenced in our report, so.
And not to kind of tie up your time this morning, but I'd love to have the chance to go through some of the jobs and economic impact stuff with you at a later point. But thank you for your work.
Thank you.
I had a couple of questions. I have not had a chance to read the report in its entirety and look forward to doing it. But at a high level, I had two questions. And the first was whether this report is designed to focus solely on the negative impacts of casino operations. And I ask that because in a number of places, it struck me that again, at a high level and a quick read, there were things that were slightly counterintuitive. You put up one of the pathway diagrams, and that was in fact, the one that caught my attention. It's at page 17 of the report. And it begins with casino opens, and then there are the intermediate pathways, and then you come to the health impacts, and you have chronic disease, cancer, mental health, and life expectancy. So a casino leads to, I mean, a quick view of that is a casino leads to chronic disease, cancer, mental health problems, and life expectancy. Why should we have these things? But it seems to me that jobs and income produce positive, may produce positive impacts as well. So that is a long and convoluted question, but I wondered what the focus and what the search was here.
Okay. So no, it wasn't meant to focus on negative. And so in the report, we do discuss that jobs would be positive, increased income, health insurance would likely improve, and we focus particularly on unemployed people because we had to limit our scope. I apologize, that is confusing. So that's what we use to guide our research, and so we went into the research without assumptions. If you look in the recommendations area, it shows the actual direction we found it to be. So it would say decrease in chronic disease, decrease in cancer. So that pathway diagram is confusing, and I apologize for that.
Got it. Well, no, it may be perfectly logical if when I read the entire thing, but I was just looking for a framework. The other piece, and again, I'm sure there's an explanation based on the fact that I didn't read the whole thing yet, is relativity. In shift work, to use as an example, shift work is associated substantively with health problems and social problems, and I understand that. But it also appears that non-gaming employees generally have more shift work than casino employees are going to have. So does the report talk about the relative impact as opposed to the absolute impact of such things as shift work?
So we do go into describing that certain types of shift work are more detrimental for health. So, for example, night shift work is actually found to be the most detrimental because of circadian rhythm disruption. So we do go into more detail on some of those things when we describe. We don't necessarily go into relative gaming versus non-gaming. So we talk about some of the literature describing what the negative impacts are, health impacts that have been associated with shift work, and then describe what the estimates are based on information that we receive from the Casino Careers Training Institute and then also from MGM on what the percentage of shift work is. And also, just to be clear, and hopefully this is clear, this is talking about shift work in general, not shift work related to casinos per se. So,
Well, it is broken down between gaming and non-gaming employees in your charts.
right.
But the impacts would, I take it, be the same, whether
Yes.
you're working at,
Yeah.
working for any operation that's operating 24/7.
Sure. In our conversation with the folks in MGM, they lifted up my other employer, Bay State Health, has shift work. And how does this apply to Bay State? And we said, it absolutely applies to Bay State. And when the report's published, I'm going to walk to HR and I'm going to say, are you guys aware of this? And how are we managing shift work as a negative impact on our employees? So to your point, it is bigger than gaming.
Right.
In our response to them, we were constrained to a health impact assessment on the casino, but the implications apply for other industries within our community, and we would hope they would lift up that understanding now, and we can carry it forward as well to health organizations that
Right.
employ shift
Right,
workers.
right. Well, it's a very thorough and comprehensive report, and as I say, I look forward to reading it in detail, so I don't miss some of these subtleties. But it seems to me the point you just made is an important one, because it seems to me that some of these findings are applicable across the board to all jobs. And are part of the context in which this ought to be considered as sort of the tip of the spear for looking at these issues more broadly.
So I think some of the design solutions we're suggesting would be the same solutions if it was another industry.
Right.
With the same kind of impact in Springfield, that we need better transit, we need more attention to environmental design and community design as it relates to public health. We need more opportunities for employment of underemployed. We need people to bring a health equity lens to the work to deal with issues of disparity. So those solutions really apply in a lot of ways. The great news is we have a casino that we can use in a positive way to bring to light some of those issues. And this casino instigates an opportunity for change. So if I pick off a couple of comments from the former presentation, it really is an opportunity to look at our community differently with a public health lens as well as an economic development lens. And we don't always use the two of those together. So this is our hope, is that we can get some integration across and get some work at that intersection of economic, community development, and health.
Thank you.
I just had one comment and maybe a question for Mark. I was interested in your data-driven analysis, which I'm a big believer. I think it's excellent. Collect the data, analyze the data, modify your strategies, which you've outlined properly. I was thinking of that in terms of traffic and crime, which are, and I noted in the report, perceived. In many cases, you have that, which is accurate, because there's no baseline, it's very hard to tell, and because the normal crime statistics, traffic statistics that are captured may not be casino-driven at all. So we need to be able to differentiate. Now, Mark, I know you had a meeting, and I really didn't have a chance to get back to you and talk about the fact that that's an important piece here, is helping the police officers from the jurisdictions in which these will be built segregate that data so that we can have accurate information about if crime has increased, if traffic crashes have increased, drunk driving incidents. So we need to be able to segregate that information. So did you talk about that at that meeting?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the issues that we're certainly wanting to take a look at. Some types of crime certainly are easier to connect to whether or not it was associated with gambling behavior or a visit to a gaming establishment. Other types of crime, it becomes really difficult to delineate that. And the research plays that out kind of across the board. And there's always limitations whenever you read this information about crime data. We are taking a very close look at this and have enlisted the expertise of some very talented people in Massachusetts to try to separate that as much as we possibly can, and that goes in terms of both our primary and secondary data collection on that issue.
Okay, thank you.
I just had the thought that this is not just Springfield specific. I mean, it does have some particular Springfield idiosyncrasies, but a lot of it is kind of commonsensical analysis that would be applied to all of our host communities. And I think it might be good if we could make sure that the report gets to our other host communities or applicant host communities and the other casino operators too, so they can have some of the same thought process in place as they're going through their process.
Yeah, I love that in Massachusetts we now have this mounting body of evidence to draw upon, whereas predominantly prior to this, it's taking a look at what all the secondary data sources from and research from other jurisdictions, and not just in the United States but internationally. And here we are. This is kind of more evidence that we can use to draft our strategies.
Yeah. This remains a really big untold story. You know, the whole research phenomenon that is in process here and what it will do for us to design strategies, to measure the impacts of strategies, to know in fact what happens to a community when you introduce problem gambling. I mean, when you introduce expanded gambling. I mean, it's just, we've talked about it, but nobody's really dawned on anybody yet just what an incredible phenomenon this is going to be, and you're contributing to it. So thank you very much. Sorry,
Yes,
Enrique.
I have one question that is sort of the same flavor of a couple of questions that have been asked, but, and I look forward to perhaps touching base one-on-one, or, maybe Mark can facilitate a conference call at some point. But I was thinking particularly of the example of air pollution, traffic, and the nexus you make to asthma. And I was wondering, how do you, if you controlled for factors that are perhaps totally unrelated to the development of a casino, like the status of the air quality in the public schools, for example, and how that may have a much bigger, maybe much of a bigger factor in contributing to asthma incidents, and the status of the indoor air quality and the convection systems in those schools. Is there any thought to those sort of externalities? How do you attribute or make that nexus without thinking of these other links that may occur elsewhere?
Right, so that's a great point. And so in Springfield, all of those factors actually likely contribute to the high rates of asthma. For our own analysis, what we did was, there's an emerging body of literature that shows that near roadway exposure, so within 200 meters of heavily trafficked corridors, you are at increased risk from illness due to asthma. And those that are going to be vulnerable are those that already have the disease, pre-existing conditions. So not just asthma, but also cardiovascular disease. And we also looked at cancer because there's literature on that as well. So our argument was that there are high existing rates and morbidity for these diseases that are impacted by air pollution, and that when we looked at current traffic levels and then the increased amounts of traffic that would be on those side streets, those local streets, that they actually reach some of those thresholds. So in some cases, the threshold was 10 to 20,000 vehicles per day. They reached those thresholds where they would lead to negative health impacts. So for our analysis, we just focused on that particular area, but definitely all of those things contribute to the existing high rates in Springfield.
In terms of the larger context, we actually operate a Pioneer Valley Asthma Coalition, and so we're involved in school-based initiatives and other environmental initiatives looking at asthma. So we had a bit of a context for we have a bit of a context, and we sort of brought some of that intelligence to this discussion, particularly around transportation and the cumulative, or the sort of the layered effect of this added pollution. We already know it's bad for all of those reasons, and we're working around that, but this is now on top of all the other stuff. And so I think there are good news solutions that we think both in terms of transit, the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission and their work, implementing one or more of our recommendations as it relates to improving transit and taking cars off the street, that has the effect of actually benefiting the general community, but in particular, we think that has some specific applications to the routes and the pathways into the casino, hub and spoke, stuff and all. There's solutions out there that I think that could be applied, that we hope that this will instigate some of that discussion as well. But we're available to talk more about that.
Yeah, we'd love to
particular-
ask more questions that
Yeah.
perhaps are
Yeah.
better for a later time.
Anybody else? Great, thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Janice, what time are our reservations? All right, so maybe rather than do racing, we should have a lunch break first, and then we'll come back. So I think maybe we ought to make it an hour, because we have to travel a little ways. So we'll try to be back by 1:20, and we will pick up with racing next. Meeting number 103, of the Mass Gaming Commission at about 1:35 on the 23rd. We will go to item number 6 on the agenda, Racing Division. Director Dernberger,
Good
all
afternoon.
yours.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair
There
and
you go.
Commissioners.
Yeah, good afternoon.
We have two items before you today. The first is proposed extension to existing chapters 128A and 128C, the laws that govern simulcast and parimutuel wagering. In the Commonwealth, as we discussed at the previous meeting, it is certainly our recommendation at this time to actively pursue a 2-year extension. These chapters, as we've discussed before, are set for repeal on July 31 of this year. We discussed last time, or I introduced to you, a handful of different modifications to those chapters and told you that we would be considering whether or not they should be part of the language that we put before you. Mindful of the Commission's parting suggestions to pare it down to whatever was just minimum necessary. We did take a good look at those modifications, and I have 3 conclusions for you. One is that the 2-year extension is an absolute necessity. The other 2 options that I think need to be addressed, and we can talk about how best to address them, are the continued simulcasting on the Wonderland and Raynham licenses and the number of race days required by law in order to conduct simulcasting. So I think we have 3 different options before you. I've put together some draft legislative language. Option number 1 would be just changing the repeal date, so that would just be Section 1 in what appears before you. If we did that and didn't introduce any of the subsequent modifications, I would have to recommend to you that we send clear signals to the legislature that the number of days requirement is going to come up. I'm quite certain that in one or both of our industries, that issue will need to be revisited at some point this year. So if simple change of the repeal date is the way that we go, I think we do need to send clear signals to the legislature that there will be another racing issue that will need to be addressed legislatively this year. The second way we could go about it would be Sections 1 and Section 2. So Section 1, again, would be the 2-year extension. Section 2 here is a provision that would change the repeal date on that simulcast license for the existing Raynham and Wonderland licensees. There are pros and cons to this. The con being that we're adding additional modifications to our proposed extension. The pros for it are that there is a contribution, of course, to our operating budget going forward. And so if in July 31st, excuse me, if this section sunsets, then we have to make a decision at the budgetary level. This is about 1/3 of our operating budget, so there would be the possibility that we would have to either cut staff or, more likely, drug testing of the horses. Excuse me. So that would be the second option, would be to pursue the extension with that single modification. Option 3 would be this entire document, which would be Section 1, the 2-year extension, Section 2, the 2-year extension of the simulcasting license for the existing licensees, and then Section 3, which would be a way to address the number of race days requirement. And again, there's 2 ways we could do this. We could, really what it comes down to is either that authority would be vested with the commission, or would we leave that authority with the legislature? And I think that's the key question. That's the key question that's come up in our discussions with stakeholders. We've had a lot of those discussions since we last met with you. And so what we've done here with this language is we've tried to address in the criteria, we've tried to address both the need to review the issue, as we've talked about before, that has primarily to do with the supply of horses and the non-competitive purse structure in Massachusetts, in the absence of supplement from gaming revenue. And then we've tried to address the concerns that we hear from stakeholders, and we recognize that there is a minimum number of days below which it doesn't make any financial sense to be in the business. And so we've tried to address both of those sides when we excuse me, put together these criteria. This would be a temporary deal. This would be a sunsetting provision in itself, and that's what Sections 4 and 5 do. So that number of race days consideration would only be in effect for this calendar year, 2014, and next year, 2015. By that time, by 2016, of course, we would hope there would be some replacement legislation in place, as we've discussed previously. But again, this 2-year extension is to bridge the gap until that time. And I apologize for my voice. I'm not quite sure what's going on. I'm not all choked up over this, if that's what you're wondering.
Director, would a decision be made if the third option was the most viable, which is to address all three of these sections? Excuse me,
See, it's contagious.
having the same issue. Would a decision be made each year on the number of race days?
Right, so I think one of the reasons we were looking at this is the uncertainty, the number of uncertainties, some of which we will know this year, such as where the licenses go. But there's a big unknown about the supply in the short term, potential construction scenarios, which could look very different between the two industries. And so I think to have the flexibility both for this year and next year, I think that's important.
Thoughts, comments, questions?
Please remind us what's the minimum number of days, and the Gaming Act grows to 125 days over some period of time. Can you remind, and starts at 100?
So the existing law is 100, and then in Chapter 23K, if a gaming license goes to an existing racing licensee, that ramp-up occurs over 3 years of operation. So it starts going up first year of operation, second year of operation, and 125 days is after the third year of operation, and then after that, actually, it goes back to the commission. Excuse me, then the commission makes a determination, I believe.
So the 125 currently is in effect for 1 year, on year 3, after which point the commission has the authority to determine the number of days.
Correct,
Based on all these factors.
correct.
Others?
But as matters now stand, that would only affect the trotters.
That's my understanding, sir.
Say that again? What was
As
that?
matters now stand, that would only affect the trotters. There's only one possibility now, as things currently stand, that a racing license, that
Oh, I see,
the trotter
because of-
racing
yeah, right,
licensee
right.
could get it. No, go ahead.
You first, please.
Well, I just wondered why, what the benefits and burdens of taking on the decision to determine the number of racing days are. The legislature won't be surprised if they get faced with that issue again. They get faced with it, it's the annual fall issue. So this is not irrational. I mean, it's thoughtful, but what are the benefits and drawbacks of leaving it where it is?
So a couple of them. One, you'll recall last year, licensees had to come to us on a piecemeal basis requesting cancellation and amendment to their schedule based on supply. So we don't have enough horses, we need to cancel, next Tuesday and reschedule it for later. And that happened, I should have had the number with me, but I think there were 8 or 9 different times that licensees had to come to us. And that's been happening the last 3 years, and that's not something that, it's not an undue burden on this commission. But we do run the risk with the sunsetting in July that if having that fight in the legislature slows down, it's actually, now that I think about this, it works both ways. Having that piece in there, we risk. I'm thinking about this backwards, Judge.
Backwards or forwards, as long as we get to the...
Backwards or forwards, right. Director Day, help me out here.
Well, what I recall in the discussion was, one of the approaches was, we were looking at this legislation to essentially ask the legislature to continue the status quo in effect, which is really why sections 1 and 2, because
Right.
that
Yeah,
keeps
I
it
understand
simple.
that.
And then the days part was, one of the other issues with that was, we're asking them to go forward with status quo, but we know that the number of days is
Right.
going to be problematic.
Right.
which is part of the reason for this. And then this is actually allows a more individual, more focused examination of the actual conditions that are there, because if the tracks persist, the idea of construction, the changes with the casino will be more directly something that the commission has the ability to take into consideration as that unfolds, as the commission administers the rest of the system.
I hear that. I just wonder if we did section 1 and 2, you can say the whole rationale in 2 sentences. You don't have to explain anything. And if we add section 3, you're into at least 2 paragraphs. And are these the right criteria? Where the criteria come from? What am I voting for? What's in, why should I do this? Are there risks? Have you built a consensus? Let me talk to all the others. And that conversation ought to take place at some point. But I wonder if, when we really want just an extension of the status quo for 2 years, if now is the time to start that discussion and have the difficulties that discussion inevitably is going to produce. Not the difficulties, but the issues. I just throw that out. I don't know what others think about that.
I had the same exact concern that since we were asking for an extension, we're kind of piecing out certain pieces that we want to reform, whatever word we want to use at this point, where we know 2 years down the road we want a wholesale reform, and the landscape will be clear at that point. So I had the same exact concern about if this was the right time to take on race days. But I do listen to
Right.
what you're saying, so I'm open to the discussion anyway.
My 2 cents worth on this is, I think I was, as much as anybody, the architect of the idea of going in, keep it simple, stupid, and go for a minimum, don't get it complicated with unnecessary stuff, pare away everything we possibly could. I think that's the right strategy. But I also think that there is one inherent conflict in extending this for 2 years, and that is the race days. We know we're not going to be able, the other issues we can live with, we can deal with those until we get around to a reform pack. This one we can't. If we're going to go for a 2-year extension, it does raise the question of how many race days are going to be gone. So it's an incomplete fix, if you will. Number one. Number two, we have talked to half of the legislature about this. We have talked with Senator Rosenberg about this. And as I've heard from many other, they don't particularly like dealing with these last-minute rushes of everybody coming in and debating about how many days we should have. They don't like dealing with it this way. They've been told repeatedly that this won't be happening anymore. And Senator Rosenberg was in favor of the idea, supportive of the idea of the 2-year extension, and of giving the authority to pick the race days to us, and authorize us to say publicly that that is what he's for. We haven't talked to the House side yet. I don't know what that'll mean, but that's one pretty good feedback about the plausibility of this in the legislature. It's certainly not so complicated that they don't understand it. I mean, it's very simple, I think, for them. And then the third, frankly, is I do think we're the place it ought to be. I mean, that is our job. And under these circumstances, particularly where no one knows what's going to be happening in these next 2 race years, with all the various complications going on, we will be overseeing most of those complications, albeit that is who's going to get the licenses and the construction process and so on and so forth. So even though it might make us take a little heat from people who will be on different sides of the issues, I think we're getting used to that. At least I am. And I think we're the right place to have it. So from my standpoint, I think the full 1, 2, 3 package is the right way to go.
Well, that's the right destination. I don't disagree with that, and I hear what you're saying. So.
I agree with that, and the authority comes to this commission eventually, even after year 3, if all things remained equal without the extension. And I agree, this is the place have a study, like we always do publicly, the however many sites, the pros and cons, the purpose and the public good, and the economics. So all of that could be analyzed on a case-by-case basis with a lot of the good feedback that we get from people who see us when we request public comment, and which is the way that we've been operating.
Right.
I just take into the account the conversations you've had with the folks in the legislature, that if they'd rather not deal with this, it doesn't seem like a huge step for us to put it out there as we're going for the extension, see what they say. I mean, you
Yeah,
got
if they don't
good
like it, they
feedback
won't
on
do
the
it.
Senate
They
side.
don't have to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to prolong this unduly, but if we go 1, 2, and 3, and if a racing licensee gets a gaming license, is there then a conflict between this and Chapter 23K?
Well, I think there,
This says notwithstanding any law to the contrary. So this would supersede theoretically the provisions of 23K that talk about extended racing days, right? That would be the theory. So implicit in this, again, it's contingent. Who knows what may happen? It may be an academic problem. But we need to be prepared, I guess, in discussions with legislators to tell them what this does. This will all be academic in 30 days, so maybe we wait a few days to. I just would hate to either wind up in a confusion or have them do something that we didn't tell them they were doing, ask them to do something without telling them of that potential complication.
Is your point that if Plain Ridge won the license, that
Yes.
they would be mandated to have 100 racing days? And
Under
that we would-
23K.
Under 23K, right. And what this would do would eliminate that mandate and give us the authority to pick however many we pick, or if we're still controlled by 23K, we would just say, well, there's not going to be 100 racing days for standardbred horse racing next year, no matter what happens, we know that. So,
It would at the very least potentially set up some confusion between this and 23K.
but is this properly written? This seems to say,
This-
notwithstanding 23K, this is the new rule, right?
Yes, and that perpetuates a sort of offline, non-general laws codicil to the general laws, which inevitably sets up. The short answer to this is, this will all be, I'm thinking out loud and I apologize, but this will all be academic. That question will be academic, perhaps, after we make the licensing decision. And if we don't have to file this before then, or if we can file this, no action is likely on it in the legislature until after we're finished, and we can file some modification later, I suppose, if it's necessary to do it.
Well, we're already into it. We've already met,
No, I
the
understand.
Senate's
I
already
understand.
been
I
told, and
understand.
we've gotten direction from the majority leader on where we should go next and who we should meet with.
Right.
And I have an appointment with the other side on Tuesday, so,
Well, maybe at the very least, what we ought to do before that appointment takes place is take a look at what happens if this passes and a license is awarded to a racing license holder in light of the provisions of 23K. So if that question comes up, we're prepared to deal with it.
yeah, well, that would be great.
and I think it would affect the 2015 meet, because that is tied to the first year of operation.
Right.
Is it after the first year of operation? I think it's in the first year of operation.
Well,
Are you looking at
we don't need to do it now,
Right.
but
Yeah,
it seems
I
to me
think
that
that's
we ought to look
All
at
right.
that.
That's what we need to look at. So we'll take a look at that.
So you were looking for a vote on this. Are we prepared to authorize the commission to go forward with this proposal, subject to getting whatever feedback the general counsel might want to give us on the impact?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Somebody want to make that motion? Judge?
I move that we vote to adopt the modifications to the existing simulcast laws contained in the proposed legislation contained in the meeting materials.
The draft interim legislative proposal, right?
Right.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Next on your agenda?
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioners. Item B, claims for payment pursuant to Chapter 128A, Section 5A, and 128C, Section 3A. These are the outs, one of our favorite subjects, which we revisited. I put together a memo for you, just talking again about the timeline and the process to refresh your memory, since you haven't had to visit that for about a year. The Sterling Suffolk Racecourse LLC licensee has submitted a list of claims against unclaimed wagers for 2012, which are now payable. Our other two licensees did not have any claims, so this is the only one that is to be approved. So with the commission's approval, the aggregate amount for these claims will then be deducted from the 2012 outs book, and then we'll come back to you in February for approval of payment of the 2012 outs into purse accounts, which is where they go. Excuse me, once these claims have been subtracted.
So this, is this motion simply to pay these claims? Oh, I misread it, okay. So there'll be a later one to take the remaining outs and put it into, okay.
Correct.
What, just out of curiosity, what does it mean when something is a voucher?
So you can go to a teller with $100 and they'll give you a ticket, just as you would in a casino, ticket in, ticket out. You can go to a self-bet machine as opposed to a person, and you put the ticket in and it's got stored value on it, so.
And does some people get paid out in cash and some people are paid out in vouchers?
So you take your voucher and you bring it up to a teller, and you get your cash out at the end of the day or whenever you bring it back in. Or if you've lost it, you submit your claim for payment.
Okay. I'd like to be Mr. Goldberg. Okay, any discussion about this? Somebody want to frame a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that the commission give approval of payment for the 2012 outs book to the listed individuals in our meeting packet.
Second?
Second. Yeah, second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it unanimously.
All right, thank you, Commissioners. That concludes the racing update for today.
Okay.
Thank you, Director.
Now go to item 8, Executive Director Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Actually, as I was looking at the general update, I had anticipated at first maybe I should start out with the wind speed's going to be 23 miles an hour and the snow is going to be a foot and it's going to be a blizzard. It seems like to me that's been part of the general update as we've been moving on here lately.
Right.
With that confusion and the scheduling aside, I did want to mention a few things just generally. First, I do plan and have been working on what I call a regulation update. So I will be bringing back to the commission a fairly concise list, as concise as we can get it, plus a related Gantt chart that will actually give the commission a pictorial representation of the various regulations and sets of regulations that we'll need to put forward. I think that'll be helpful for you all to see kind of where we're at, where we are, and how much is ahead of us. I anticipate I'll probably end up doing that about in the second February meeting due to the whole scheduling thing that we'll be facing. Secondly, decisions. We've been spending quite a bit of time trying to work. We've got our responses, of course. We're working to find the office space that would be suitable for us, but at the same time be very sensitive to the speed to which we have to bring the organization up and add places for people to be able to sit, along with looking for the various cost-effective nature of each of the offers that we've had to date. So that's going to continue to take us a little time as we work through those various possibilities.
Did I see an email that suggested that the two financial district proposals are now identical in terms of their effective rates, effective rental rates?
Actually, no, the lower one went to the upper one.
Really?
Yes.
So we had made sort of a tacit decision. Is that being rethought now?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Along with a number of other factors.
Maybe the minority view might win out in the end
It wouldn't be a minority
anymore.
view if,
Yeah, good point. Yeah, good point.
Along with the many other activities, of course, I think it's worth mentioning, we have our licensing group has completed their administrative complete review of the licenses. They have corresponded and basically the applications are not licenses, applications, primarily complete, but there are a few things that they need to follow up, mostly not of serious nature, that they'll be cleaning up as we move forward to formal start of the evaluation process. Of course, in the evaluation process, as the Commission knows, we're winding down in Category 2, but at the same time, you're preparing to wind up for the Category 1 applications. So that should be as you do both, should be an exciting process, I think, for everybody on both sides. And then the surrounding communities, of course, I think we passed a milestone as the surrounding community issues for the Category 2 applicants have been settled at this point, at least officially, and now we're going to be starting heavily into the surrounding communities for Category 1 and live impacted venues next week with the petitions from the communities. With that, it brings me to the, I think the significant topic that we're here today, which is the budget update and assessment process. To start with, our CFAO, Derek Lennon, and his staff have been working very hard to project our 2014 expenses based on actuals and estimates for the remaining year, and have also planned today to include sort of the status payments of our investigation and evaluations, as well as a couple other significant areas. So I'll turn this over to Derek, and we'll come back as we begin to talk about the assessment process. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Commissioners, for having me. Today, I'd like to go over a few things. One, our quarterly budget and revenue update. Second, the new view that we're presenting the budget in and our revenue. An overview, as Rick said, of our Phase 1 investigative costs. Overview of Phase 2 reviews. And then Rick and I will have a discussion with you, hopefully, on the process moving forward for assessment and use of revenues. So this is the first time I've had opportunity to come back in front of you and talk actual budget numbers since November 7th. I've been able to work with each division, with each director to figure out what their anticipated costs at the contractual level, as well as at the conceptual level would be to close out the rest of this year. And as you can see, and I apologize for the size of the spreadsheet in your packet, however, yeah. What you see is we've broken it down to the actual cost categories that the state accounting system uses. We're required to use the Massachusetts Management Accounting and Reporting System in our statute, and the state employees call it MARS. And sometimes when you try to read it, it's in that language. But we have all of our expenditures as well as our projections by month broken down into each cost category that the state accounting system uses. We had told you we planned on moving towards this method, and the first page is a summary level. The second page breaks it down into a little further detail, and then we actually have databases built back internally that I didn't want to move out until we could put all the information into the state accounting system starting in FY15 that actually breaks us down by each division. So if you look at our big one, the HH object class, which handles consultants, which is projected about 11 million, we could tell you each contract or projected spending and within which division that 11 million is broken down. And once we load that into FY15, we'll be able to report at that level and have that as part of your backup package and expenditures against that and down to the contract level against that as well.
Great.
So now to get to the overall numbers, we're projecting to spend about 24 million in FY14. And I know that sounds like a high number. There's a good reason for that. About half of that is going towards what we could consider one-time costs. About 8 million of it is going towards Category 1 investigations and Category 2 reviews. 537,000 is going to grants to host communities. And about 3.5 million is going to the DPH baseline study that our problem gambling division is doing, which theoretically would be funded out of the trust fund in the future. So our $24 million budget is half one-time costs. Our salaries.
When you say one-time costs now, and on those, the 8 million that is investigations and assessments, is that allocating fixed costs in there, or that's all literally one-time?
Well, we have the, that's not allocating the fixed costs. That's
That's not
just the
allocating.
pure investigations.
Okay, so,
That's pure contracts.
okay,
It has nothing to do with the 13.71% overhead.
right, okay.
That's just pure contractual costs.
Okay, so can you give an estimate, you know, when we get to 2016 and we're out of the one-time cost business, what does our steady state operating cost look like? Do you have it approximately?
That's the point that I have to get to with staff. So using this, and I was going to get to that a little later, but using this as our baseline, then going through and pulling out all of our one-times,
Right.
pulling out all of our startup costs, because we're heavy into consultants as well, and I didn't put those into one-time costs, but taking a look at how staff salaries would back out, would ease in, and consultant costs would back out is what I'm looking to present in hopefully April to you.
So that,
But just to get an idea, only 5 million of our costs this year are actual staff salaries, fringe benefits, and employee reimbursements.
okay,
So out of that 24, we're heavily consultant-based.
right.
Is of the one-time costs, are the investigative costs offset by revenues that we receive from the applicants?
Yeah.
In total, they are. The timing of costs versus revenues over fiscal years
Right.
is a little different, but in total, yes, we have, and that'll be part of the presentation that we'll go over for the investigations and the,
All right.
So you probably haven't been able to do the kind of sniff test of other agency costs that we've talked about?
it'd be difficult to do that right now, not knowing what our
Because you don't
full
know what ours
staffing,
are. Yeah,
what our
okay.
full staffing contingency will
Okay.
be. So
Yeah, okay.
we've taken a look at some of the other commissions, but as far as us being able to, they're up and running, they're
Right,
full
I
support,
understand.
we're well behind that.
Okay,
But we will be able to do a comparison and say, here's where this one is,
Right.
here's where we are, and here's the differences.
right, okay.
So on the revenue side, you'll see that our low point is right around March. So to take a look at the chart there, you've got our costs at the top, our revenues at the bottom, and the middle has a section that says our cash balance at the end of each month. And our low point will be at the end of March leading into April, and then we anticipate on bringing in, taking a piece of the initial licensing fee for the slots, dropping that into the gaming control fund, which would give us a $20 million boost, and then leave us with approximately 15 million at the end of the year. And the chart's saying 15.7, but we have some excess revenues in there from Region C applicants that I can't count going into next year. So we'll use approximately 4.5 to 5 million of the of the initial 20 million in FY14.
Where does the Phase 2, Category 1 collection number for April come from?
That's what we're anticipating for remaining costs for Phase 1. The 367 or,
2.8?
oh, the 2.8, that's an estimate of what we have for the Category 1 reviews. We don't have hard, firm numbers yet, so we just put in 2.8. There's a 2.8 spending figure also built into the HH object class, so if that number drops, our revenue will drop, but it'll be an offset, it'll be a wash.
Okay, so that's reimbursement from the applicants? the
Correct,
three
from the
applicants.
3 applicants,
Right.
correct.
And we anticipate being able to collect that in April?
Correct.
Okay.
Actually, to that point, there's no reason why we couldn't try to bring that up a little.
I was just
For-
trying to be realistic and
Yeah.
not throw.
I
No,
understand. I
because
understand.
we are, we know the universe, we are effectively a lot more knowledgeable about how much it takes to review these proposals, albeit we have 18,000 pages times 3.
Yeah, it's about 10 cents a page, I think.
That's what it comes down to. So I think we could be a little bit more aggressive, but realistic is fine.
Okay.
Being realistic is fine.
So just the report behind the cover page goes a little more in depth. And if you guys have any more questions on the budget for this year, the format of it, any costs that are included in it. One piece that we did want to go over, let me just pull out one of my attachments here, I apologize, was the IT licensing database and our projected cost for that. Right now, we have an estimate of $1.84 million, of which we've spent about $668,000 to date. What goes into that is hardware, software development, a virtual environment, rack space, because the state data center couldn't host the application, and then some Microsoft licenses. I know that originally we had reported that back at 1.3, but that didn't include a lot of the hardware costs. That was just pure development, so, and licenses.
I had a couple of questions, and
Okay.
one or two I can take up with you individually, but P06 on page 3, is that the money that's going to the UMass study?
That is.
Okay. And where does U05 come from?
U05.
4 lines down.
U05 is a combination of the development for, I'm sorry, I'm just going to pull it up right now. That's a combination of the development for the licensing system, as well as we've set aside a couple $100,000 for the automated accounting system if we decide to procure that. So we've built that in.
Okay, so that's the personnel costs for implementing the
Yeah,
system.
those are the consultants that are implementing the systems.
Okay. And finally, does the employee compensation includes all of the racing employees, right,
No, that does not. This is just for the,
Just for the-
this appropriation, the gaming.
for the game? Okay.
There's another 440,000 approximately on the racing
Okay.
side. But it does include our projected hires, so it has about 15 positions built in with varying start dates, which
Okay.
is something we had reported at past
In this fiscal
in this
year?
fiscal year, which would annualize out to, I think it's
Okay.
about 1.2 million.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, Derek, where was the grants to cities and towns that request, for which we are pass-throughs?
That would be under the PO1.
Pier 1.
So if you look at that back page, and there's a few other grants included in there too that we've done. But the majority of that, the 537 sitting in that number.
Now, The P,
And I apologize that we don't have all the details. I can get the reports that built it to you afterwards, that built this. I just didn't, I don't have it built in the accounting system, so it's not a true one-to-one reconciliation.
but the P category does not get charged the indirect cost, is that correct?
So we're not getting charged, if you look on this, the cover sheet, we're not getting charged indirect costs at all this year. We got a waiver from administration and finance.
Yes.
And that hit in December, you'll see a negative 292,000 under the EE object class. So that we actually got our money back that the state had charged us in indirect costs. But typically, only AA, CC, HH, and JJ, and a few UU, and I'm sorry, I'm speaking Mars again, which is why, but personnel-driven object classes get charged indirect rate. And since we're not a recipient of any direct funds, federal funds, we would only be charged a 10% rate on those object class. We'll request that waiver again next year, but it is built in that we should be paying it into our statute. And I assume once we get assessed on the industry, we won't have much of a baseline for requesting a waiver from the indirect rate.
So we are currently not, we got.
We
the
are not
fiscal-
paying it right now.
We're not.
We were reimbursed for it
For fiscal year 13,
for fiscal year 14.
for 14 as well?
We had a waiver in fiscal year 13. We have a waiver currently in 14.
Okay,
And we'll have to go through the waiver process again in fiscal year 15.
15.
I just thought up another question,
Yes.
but this will be the last. I take it that the vast majority of the HH services are, expenses are the one-time costs you were talking about?
Yes, they are. That's approximately 8 million of it.
Yeah, okay.
Of the investigations costs.
Investigations and
even the
reviewers.
lawyers will go down, right, okay. Okay,
I didn't want to go without mentioning that this represents a lot of work. That, as you know, I started doing in a very rudimentary spreadsheet, and is now does not now has all of the infrastructure to be able to produce these essentially anytime we want, a budget to actual. You know, we could continue at the pace that we have been going on a quarterly basis. Or maybe even more. But more importantly, I think we should make it a good habit of posting a report like this, summary or detail, to our website, making it, you know, very available to the general public who may be interested, because I think it's very important for, you know, the mission that we carry and what it takes to carry it. So I'm very happy that we've reached a point where that is a lot easier to do, and I really commend you for a lot of the work that
I do
goes
too.
behind.
I mean,
I do
you pulled this together very quickly, Derek, which is great. It's really, Rick, it's really been great to get our arms around this.
Thank you. I've had great support from everyone at MGC as well as from my staff. So it's been a pleasure producing this.
There is one category that none of us knew about until very recently that's not on here that could turn out to be material, which is the Caesars lawsuit.
I've built in some funds
You have?
for that
Okay.
cost.
Okay,
I've
good.
talked to our general counsel, and we have that built into the legal budget.
Okay. Good. I didn't see that.
I would second, before we leave this topic or move on to another phase of it, Commissioner Zuniga's point about posting regularly this kind of information, whether it be quarterly or monthly with an actual to budget, so that everybody, including us, can see where we are on an ongoing basis. So I don't think we need a vote, but if we can just go ahead and do that, if everybody's happy with that.
Oh, we will do that.
We will.
Okay.
That's for sure.
We'll do
The
that.
point being is that now we have the tools to do it very
Right.
easily.
Okay.
So it will be done.
All right. So now I'll move on to, I think it's page 5 in your packet. The Phase 1 consultants, collections and payments to date. Now, this isn't just for 14, this takes into fiscal year 14, this takes into account fiscal year 13 and 14 an overall view. And we have collected 12.15 million for Phase 1 investigations. We have forecasted costs from our consultants for about 10.8 million. That leaves a balance of 1.3 million from what we've collected. We were charging a 13.71% overhead. That would, on the 10.8 million, that would give us about $14.74 million, $1.47 million in overhead. So we're already operating somewhat as a loss based on what our estimates are for forecast costs and our collections. And we haven't finished investigations because some people have opened up again to possibly be applicants in Region C. So we are recommending, and as long as you guys are all right with it, we're going to move ahead with billing an additional $367,000 to the applicants listed.
I didn't understand on this one, why, the last line, proposed invoice amount of zero in many columns where there is, in the balance row, a balance shown. If you take, for example...
That's the collections, the top line minus the forecast amount.
The balance is the collections minus the forecast amount.
Correct.
But then, and then you add administrative costs to that. right?
Correct. Yes.
And then you get to the proposed invoice amount, let's just take Plainridge, of zero. So it's...
So they actually have a surplus sitting there, so they have about 60,000 sitting there.
Where's the 60,000?
Oh, you're correct.
All across the bottom line, I just thought we were leaving about $1 million on the table.
Well, plain,
Well, take, maybe
Plainridge is a bad
Plainridge is
example.
a special case, but
Yeah,
take some of the others, where we have a proposed invoice amount of zero, but if you go up to the balance plus administrative costs, you have for Rainham, for example, $108,000, and a proposed invoice amount of zero.
well, it's the balance and the administrative cost should not be added, should be looked at for the difference. If the difference is negative, they need to be invoiced. If the difference is positive, they may be monies due back to them, which we will do in the future, but we're not invoicing anything at this point. Is that a fair statement, Derek?
No, he actually, the judge does bring up a good point. We probably should invoice for a few more. Because on this case, we have, and I can explain a little better right now, just because this is new information. A lot of we weren't looking at the court reporting costs or some of the meeting costs that we had to go through for complete suitability hearings. So all we were looking at were the actual investigations. So that second line of other costs, we weren't taking into consideration when we were initially doing our billing. So that's what has thrown some of these into a negative. So we do need to do a further review, and we should bill additional money.
Oh, I see, though, in some cases, there's a refund due.
There will be a refund due, and that's why in that first line, and
I see.
if you look at the first spreadsheet I put up compared to what I'm saying we're going to use from the stabilization, from the $20 million that we get, it actually only says on the spreadsheet about 4.25 million, but I'm saying we're going to need between 4.5 and 5 based on where we've end out when we finally reconcile after all of the reviews and all of the investigations are completed.
Okay, maybe I could talk with you further.
There does need to be a final reconciliation done, you're correct.
Okay.
In other words, appears to be a problem with that last line.
Okay, I'll take that and move on.
You're correct.
All right, thanks.
I was going to go through MGM, which is perhaps easy to
I know,
visualize.
I think I understand. In some places, that should be a negative number, in some places, it should be a positive number. Right?
Yes.
Right,
And yes,
got it.
we
Thanks.
will invoice or
Refund.
Right.
accordingly.
Right.
And then just as one final update, on the Category 2, Phase 2 consultant reviews, we have invoiced for 1.5 million, and we've spent 711,000 to date. Some costs are coming in lower than was anticipated, so there will likely be some refunds barring any catastrophic events.
What is the expenditures in this chart?
The paid amount is the bottom line,
Oh, there you go. 711.
711.
But we have bills still to pay. I mean,
We do still
we
have bills
not-
to pay. We do still have bills to pay. This is for invoices that we've received through services for December.
Right. There's at least a couple of months, because even when we're done with the evaluation, we get bills
Yes.
30, 45 days later.
Okay, thanks.
And with that, we'll move on to our budget process and cost assessment process.
Thank you, and if I might refer the commission, it should be behind tab 7BI, and what you have there is a chart that we attempted to put together that actually reflects a number of discussions and debate that's been going on about how we might actually accomplish assessment, along with taking into consideration of various public comments we got and applicant comments about what they would like us to consider. So I just want to run through this real quick as best I can, and then I'll go through it all and have maybe an option as I get to the end. It might be easier than pausing in between for questions, but if you feel that it's time, please don't hesitate to interrupt me. What I want to do is take a look at the top part of the graph. You'll notice we built a graph, and what we have indicated is essentially 25 million. This is licensing fees, so this just is attempted to represent what, at this point with the schedule, what we anticipate will be the first licensing fee that comes in. So as that comes in, the plan would be that the commission would move 20 million of that 25 over to the gaming control fund and 5 million over to the license fund. Going on with that 5 million, the 5 million would be distributed as required in the statutes, and we would use the 20 million to supply operations as we are moving forward. The proposal in this case, and I'll deal with this, is basically to look at a startup budget that consists of our 2014 deficit that we've been talking about, which Derek touched on, may be around 4 to 5 million, plus the fiscal year 2015 budget, and I'll move on with what we would do with that here as we move forward. I'll also touch on, as our process goes forward, we're anticipating we would actually be repaying the Commonwealth Stabilization Fund with the resort license fees, and I'll touch on that as we go forward, why that might be appropriate. So if we go down the bullets, I think it's important just to cover that it's necessary to maintain control over gaming establishments for us to fund operations. Now, the next question, we would like the commission to think about this a little bit. We have been debating on whether the billing process or the assessment would be proportionally split up between 4 licenses or 3 licenses. After some discussion, we're thinking that 3 licenses at this point might be more appropriate because of the uncertainty around 4 licenses, and we are talking about our operating funds. If, in fact, the commission ultimately awarded a 4th license, then we would basically do a billing and reconciling process with the other 2. That's just a recommendation, but it does need commission to either say go forward with that process or not. We do advocate that the assessments would be a condition of licensure. We're also suggesting in this theory that the assessment be on a quarter, or the billing be on a quarterly basis with the first 6 months assessment due. That's so we always have 3 months essentially in the bank as we move forward in collecting the rest of the quarterly payments that cover the fiscal year 2014 and 15. We do encourage that it would be important to adopt a new regulation that includes the annual budget, reconcile bill and refund, as we've talked about. In effect, we've talked a lot about the stabilization, and in the next graph we look at, we'll give this picture, make this picture a little more clearly. We would be actually borrowing from the Community Mitigation Fund and Transportation Infrastructure Fund, and I'll talk about that a little bit as we move forward. Debt repayment schedule, the commission would need to let us know what term we would want to recover these funds to be able to repay this $20 million. And then I'll go, Section 93B is part of the issue that we have to look at exactly how that would take place. The big key to that is this particular section of the Act requires that the stabilization fund be repaid before there can be any distributions out of the Transportation Infrastructure and Community Mitigation Fund. So we're talking about addressing that with actually, as the license fees come in, and I'll talk about that if we flip to the other graph that's on the next page. This is if we decide on a longer term repayment, which I want to talk about a little bit towards the end. So what the top does is it basically refers to the total amount of licensing fees that we anticipate that'll come in. We've already talked about the $20 million that would be diverted to the Gaming Control Fund. The other $175 million would be in the license fund. And then point you to the distributions that are required from the license fund. And what this basically portrays is that there would be a repayment of the stabilization fund in that process, and then we would eventually repay, depending on the repayment schedule, the Transportation Development and Community Mitigation Fund. And the reason for that little change for the Commission to consider is there can't be any distributions to these two funds until such time as there's repayment or that stabilization money is repaid.
So that's a clause we weren't talking about when we looked at this the last time.
Right, we had, we kind of in our last review, we've taken section 93 is included for your convenience, and it's kind of right at the end of the statute, little b.
Wait, hang on a sec, which is,
It's the last one, right to the end. I think
this is our regs, or this is the statute?
It's right after the regs.
it's right after, there's two regs. It's the
Yeah.
last piece of paper before the next tab.
Okay, yeah.
And then go to B, go about the middle there.
All right.
Last three sentences or so.
One and two is community, right. What is the Transportation Infrastructure and Development Fund? What does that do? I can't remember.
It's a fund that the trustee is the Secretary of Transportation, and it gives money to local communities for transportation projects. So it's similar to it's not ours, but it does go out to municipalities.
But it has nothing to do with gaming. It's just
No,
a
just
use of
another
the
fund,
funds
yeah.
for DOT.
Yeah.
Okay.
So under this theory, what we're working on is as if we repaid the 20 million to stabilization, we'd go forward with the distributions that were allowed, and then as we collected the 20 million, we'd pay it back to these two funds as opposed to the stabilization. Same practical result, except that it allows distribution of all the money.
Right. Okay, I got to think that one through a little bit, but I get the problem, and that makes sense, I think. But that's a new one on me. I hadn't thought about that yet.
Yeah, I just learned it last week. The hook is to repay the stabilization fund prior to these two funds, not all of the other funds.
Right.
Otherwise, there'd be 42 million sitting in the licensing fund that we wouldn't be able to release. So we figure if we give a piece to the mitigation fund and to the Transportation Infrastructure Development Fund, at least they have some startup money, and then we can repay that schedule. And depending on the term that we choose, we can either pay it back before the licensing fund expires, or if we go with a longer term, then it would have to come right from the Gaming Control Fund.
Right.
So as you can see, we've got a number of moving pieces, and so one thing that somewhere along the road, I thought, well, perhaps we're just being too complex about this, and so after rethinking a little bit, I had a shorter recommendation to see if it would still get us to where we wanted to be, and I think it would work. We start out the same. We transfer the 20 million to our operations. We don't attach any, as I believe we've been requested to in the comments. We have no additional dollars that we attach to the awards of the licenses. We do put in the language that they must pay their reimbursements. We actually begin the commission's annual billing process, the regular process that we'll use. We begin that in fiscal year 2015. We incorporate as part of the cost assessment that develops that the costs that develop that assessment, the repayment of the dollars that we actually use. And right now we're talking about the 4 to 5 million in 2015. And we develop a repayment schedule that goes over essentially 2015, fiscal year 2015, and the last 6 months of 2016. And what we would end up doing is then repaying the 20 million to the stabilization fund in that case before the expiration of the license fund, and then we'd complete distribution before that of all the funds. And essentially from there on out, we'd still be using the same process we're going to use over the next years and how we're going to assess license funds. We have a draft of the reg. Under this proposal, it will need a little modification. We would essentially amend that new proposed regulation into 121, so we would end up with just one process and there would be no conflict in distribution. The disadvantage, of course, that I can see is that obviously there is a higher dollar amount in repayment. It's in a shorter period than we had talked about, but it seems to do quite a bit to go toward to not increase that incoming cost with awards and make it clear as how the commission will assess its dollars. And we would only actually be assessing what we actually needed for a deficit in our 2014 period. The money would stay in there until we essentially chose to repay it, so it would also help to have a cushion in there in 2015 as well.
And equally important, everybody, well, two applicants for Region A and one applicant, I'm sorry, for Category 1 and one applicant for Category 2 would all be assessed at the same time.
Correct.
Which I think, sometime, as you mentioned, in fiscal year 2015.
Correct. That's right.
But not just one category on fiscal year 14, which was what we talked about a few weeks ago, and caused an undue burden on the Category 2.
Correct, and those assessments would be proportional on number of gaming positions as in our regulation projected gaming positions.
How do we, did you say, Commissioner, that we'd assess the applicants for this operating money?
He said applicants.
I said applicants.
You meant
Licensees.
I meant licensees.
I meant
It'd be
licenses.
the license,
Yes.
the Region A licensee, the Region B
B
licensee,
licensee.
and the slots.
And the slots,
Correct.
at the same time.
Yeah.
Not,
Okay,
the
got it.
constraint was we
Okay.
couldn't
Right.
transfer
Right.
or go by fiscal years.
Right.
What,
That is cleaner, simpler,
yes.
right.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is really
And
good.
fairer.
Yeah, there's beginning to be a fair amount of pushback from the casino licensees, particularly MGM and Wynn, about having the open-ended assessment of our operating
Right.
costs on the licensees. And there's some data that says how other regions do it and how other jurisdictions do it and so forth. What they would like to see is have it be an appropriation. And there's no way in hell that's ever going to happen. But I think we should be thinking about some way to address their concern about a sort of an open-ended checkbook with
Right.
no discipline, and that's a
Right.
legitimate concern.
Right.
If we just get to willy-nilly assess our costs,
Right.
and so I don't really have an answer for that now, but certainly we would, in our budget process, we would post it, we would discuss it, we would show what our
Right.
costs are, why
Right.
our costs are.
Right.
We would compare
Right.
our costs to other jurisdictions as we can make apples compare to apples. But I think there's a small amount of legitimacy to their concern, and I think our budget process needs to address that with transparency and detail and justification, so they know we're not just blowing money.
Mr. Chairman,
And some of the one-time costs may be fueling that concern, that here we are just starting up and we have this budget here without,
Right.
and this,
Well,
so
then
this
there's-
kind of thing will help the transparency.
There's now pushback, which I hadn't heard before, about our investigative costs
Right.
being quite a bit higher apparently
Right.
than other people have charged. So they're nervous that we're not gonna.
Right.
So, and there's some, as I said, there's some merit to that,
Right.
so, but I think we can address that.
Well, we just, to that end, and you alluded to this, I've done a little bit of this research, and there will be more done certainly as part of the next budget process prior to June, as to just how much other commissions cost, where that money comes from. Some are appropriated, some are given a cap, some are given a % on gross gaming revenues. So everybody's a little bit different. Some have many more casinos, others have fewer. We'll have a really robust comparison to
Right.
put everything
Right.
into context.
Right, right.
We always intended to.
I need to move on, just because I'm gonna have to leave. Are you done with your budget item?
Actually, I've got.
Okay.
First couple of questions is, one, looking to the commission to allow us to move forward, either with the option I described or one of the other recipes, and if we move forward with the option I described, our step would be to move forward the regulation through the formal process for adoption. So we're at the point where we need to take some positive steps to move forward to make sure we've got the revenue.
I don't think we really need a vote for this, do we?
No, an expression, but
Yeah.
I certainly favor the option that Director Day
Yeah.
proposed.
Everything that you outlined on those two
Right.
pages of budget process and so
Right.
forth, I think we're
Right.
with you.
Okay.
And I do have one more question.
Okay.
Is the Public Health Trust Fund assessment.
Yep.
We would be recommending that we would start that in the 2015 budget. And so I just wanted to check with the commission to see if you wanted to go in a different direction or would tell us to move forward with that plan as well.
Off the top of my head, I would say yes, we would expect to do that in the 2015. How much is a question, I think. I think the statute says not less than 5 million. That's another place where the bidders are getting concerned that, that might be open-ended. But we may, I don't know that we need $5 million in 2015, and I don't know that it's an appropriate number in 2015. So there's some issues to be dealt with there. But certainly in general, I would say, yes, we're definitely anticipating. I mean, as a practical matter, if it doesn't come out of the Public Health Trust Fund, it's gonna have to come out of our operating expenses. So it's not new money, it's just a matter of putting in the proper buckets and letting the Secretary of Health and Human Services have his or her appropriate input to its utilization. So, because we make all the decisions if it's our budget, and he or she, has a hand in those decisions, at least if it's in the Public Health Trust Fund. So yes, I would say yes, you should assume that. And we'll,
Yep, no
as
sooner.
Mr.
In
Wynn
other
said,
words.
God lives in the details, but we'll get to the details, but conceptually, yes. Okay?
Yeah, I think, I agree with that, but I would like to have, that's a little bit different than the other, and I would like to have the conversation we're gonna have about how much and when.
and so forth. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
We could bring really a proposal
Right.
back to start the discussion
Right.
about that.
And, Director Vander Linden is going to have a lot to say with
Right,
that.
right.
He's beginning to get on
Right.
top of that.
Right.
If I could go to item number C.
I
is
am
that-
done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
item number C is part of your agenda too, I think. It's this 8C, this is the tax withholding issue, which had been basically in my bailiwick. What I'm going to do is run through this kind of quickly, and I may slightly misstate it, some of these things, because it's incredibly complicated. There are many different wrinkles to this statute and similar statutes. Fortunately, I had Catherine and Todd help me understand what the law actually probably says. But I think I've got it in pretty much broad terms, and I just want to walk through what my state of mind on this is and see if we can get a consensus for how the commission should continue to move forward on this. Everybody sort of is reading this rule, the industry and we sort of by osmosis, everybody's kind of reading this statutory statutory mandate that we have to report and withhold at every $600 winnings in all of our gambling, essentially. Pari-mutuel, slots, table games. And that has got the industry in an uproar. The federal standards are that you report $1,200 winnings on slots. Incidentally, let's see, you report on 1,200 winnings on slots. You withhold and report on $5,000 winnings if the odds were more than 300 to 1. And you report on any other $600 winnings if those are over odds of 300 to 1. So pari-mutuel would come under that rule. And there are, I gather, a lot of pari-mutuel bets where the odds are in excess of 300 to 1, so they are having to report on the $600. And at the federal level, you can offset winnings against losings, and in some cases, you can offset the cost of your wager against your winnings. There are 23 states in the union that have commercial gaming. That is not tribal gaming, but commercial gaming, where the state's law plays a role. Of those 23 states, at least 18 either use the federal standard or no standard at all. The other 5 states have nothing so onerous as ours. Ours is by far the most onerous tax, both reporting and withholding requirement. All of our surrounding states, Maine, Connecticut, New York with some slight wrinkles, and Rhode Island, use the federal standard. So the problem that we have been presented by the industry, and I've now had a chance to look into and come to my own conclusions, is that there are several serious issues with this status as it is. They would feel that our expanded gaming facilities would be at a substantial competitive disadvantage, that high rollers, frequent gamblers would simply go, if there was any place anywhere remotely close, where they weren't going to have their flow of gaming interrupted so frequently by having to stop it and report and withhold, and where they didn't have to take 5%, an additional 5% off the top at so many of their winning transactions. So there's a competitive disadvantage that our operators are beginning to express quite a bit of concern about as to whether or not they can really do the job that they would like to be able to do. 2, there's an administrative challenge. When Enrique and I were in Maryland, we were talking with the Maryland Live folks. When they have a winning under $1,200, they use the federal standard, so they don't do reporting until they have a $1,200 winning on slots. When they do a winning under $1,200, it takes them 3.5 minutes to pay out the jackpot. Somebody gets a call saying there's a win. You gonna say something?
Can I edit something? Actually, when they have a call for service under $1,200 or the machine jams, it takes them 3 minutes to clear that call for service.
Or pay out the winnings.
No, under $1,200, the machine pays the winnings. It's above $1,200 that they have to stop. It's not a call for service. He said it's an automatic stop that takes them a little longer, which is where you were going.
Yeah.
The only thing I'm correcting is that under $1,200, they don't have to have the machine stop for the payout. The machine pays it out.
Okay, I thought they had a...
It's a call for service, the machine is
Okay.
wrong,
Okay.
the metric is, it takes them significantly less time to call.
Right, okay. So where a person has to go to the slot to do something, I thought it included paying out, but maybe it's just fix the machine. It typically is a 3.5 minute labor transaction. Where they have to go through the reporting, the withholding requirement, the reporting, not the withholding, the reporting requirement, fill out the W-2G information, it takes 15 minutes. So it's almost 5 times as much labor, and there'd many, many more transactions because there are so many transactions between 600 and 1,200 where now they don't have to involve. So the second problem with this statute is a tremendous administrative cost to the operator. The third problem with this statute is in the judgment of our consultants, HLT, the amount of money that the Commonwealth would gain by having withholding paid immediately between 600 and 1,200, or 600 up, I guess, would be less than the money we would lose by driving big gamblers out of state and other jurisdictions. Their estimate is that the net loss to the Commonwealth in terms of revenue would be between $29 and $58 million. They do. I put the memo in the books. You've seen the calculations. I'm sure you can debate the assumptions, but in the informed judgment of HLT, this is not a moneymaker for the Commonwealth. It is at least a wash, and in their judgment, probably a substantial loss to the Commonwealth. The last reason that I think there's a problem with this statute is just my own judgment that I don't think it's fair to make people pay taxes on $600 winnings independent of how much money they lost, or for that matter, how much money they wagered. That just makes no sense to me. You come in one day, you lose $2,000, the next day you win 600, and you have to pay income tax on the 600. To me, that is not fair. The IRS doesn't think that's fair. So in my view, that is a fourth problem with this statute. Incidentally, this is kind of an aside, but it's not irrelevant. The lottery does have to report and withhold at $600. But the lottery, when you win $600 or more, requires you to go to the lottery to get your money. It has nothing to do with the flow of the game. That's an imposition which is already imposed on people. They have to go to the lottery to get their money. It's very different. It's different in Maryland. In Maryland, which uses the federal standards, they also have $600 withholding for the lottery. So there is an understandable distinction between a lottery having a lower threshold and the slots and table games. When I first looked at this, I was hoping, as there are on a lot of the issues that are in our legislation, that these were problems that we could address either with moral suasion or regs or whatever. I talked about this at length with Catherine and Todd. I think there is some wiggle room in this statute. I think there's a good reading that it does not apply to table games. Thank you very much, Catherine and Todd. I think there might be some wiggle room in how you interpret the word payment. This is only supposed to happen when winnings are paid, a payment is made. I think you might be able to argue about that. And there's some debating about the extent to which and how it applies to pari-mutuel. So if we wanted to go to DOR and try to work out some regs to kind of minimize the impact of this, I think we could make some progress, but I don't think that's the right solution. It's a piecemeal solution. It doesn't address the slots issue, probably doesn't end up addressing the pari-mutuel issue. We might be able to exempt the table games, but that's only a relatively small part of the problem. So it seems to me that given that of the 23 jurisdictions where states have such rules, 16 at least, maybe 17 or 18, mirror the feds, and the other 2 or 3 have 0 withholding requirements, reporting or withholding requirements, that's a pretty well-established best practice. This is what the Internal Revenue Service figures is appropriate, and 90% of the other jurisdictions, 95% of the other jurisdictions in the United States. So that the right way to go would be fundamentally, and as I have learned from my compatriot, the former judge, you got to look at the law and actually see what it says and how it works and where you're crossing yourselves up. But as a general principle, it seems to me that we would be well advised to lead an initiative to the legislature to amend the statute to fundamentally mirror the feds relative to these rules, and whatever other wrinkles we come up with as we go into this in more detail. There are a bunch of other issues that the bidders have now begun to raise formally and somewhat aggressively. The on-site childcare, trying to get some assurance that the tax rates won't change, minimum annual capital expenditures, on-site site space for substance abuse, the pooling of tips and gratuities, reports on complimentary services, cashless wagering, et cetera, and a few others. Most of those, as I read them, we can work our way through in regs. Some of them we're going to need to look in more, but I think the only one that I've come to see could possibly be a showstopper is the withholding, reporting, and the reporting and withholding requirement at $600. We'll continue to look into those other ones, and I'll continue to take the lead on that. So my bottom line on this is that the industry is not crying wolf here. This is a legitimate problem. We are substantially out of step with the established best practices at the state and federal level. And we would be well advised for a lot of reasons having to do with revenue to the Commonwealth, maximization of our competitive position, giving our bidders the tools to give us the money we want, and equity. We would be well advised to go forward. We can talk about it as much as anybody wants to talk about it. What I would hope to get from the commission, if everybody agrees, is authorization to move forward quickly to fine-tune this research, get something drafted, and get it to the legislature quickly.
Well, I am in full support and agree with this great summary of a lot of the very nuanced moving pieces here, Mr. Chairman. I have expressed that to me is very much a competitive issue, creating a robust gaming environment, which is a paramount of the Gaming Act, and repatriating dollars that are currently leaving, attracting dollars that are not coming here, and with the proximity of states like Rhode Island and Connecticut that do have a robust gaming marketplace with a very different, that follow the federal thresholds, in and of itself could be a disadvantage for the gaming environment that we're trying to create here. So as you term it, equity, I very much see it through the lens that you yourself mentioned, one of competitive and one of, creating a robust gaming environment here.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yep, I agree. The federal standard would be a good one to model here. Makes perfect sense to me.
I take a little bit different view, I regret to say. I first of all think that this is a model that was copied from the lottery, and it does not have a tight fit for the reasons that you've carefully said. Secondly, I don't believe that this 6% collection ought to apply to table games. It completely interrupts the flow. It's impractical. You can't tell what the winnings are at the craps table, for example. It's very hard to do this and figure out what the winnings are. I mean, you can do it, but if you have to stop for big bets. What I'm not convinced of is two things. One, that it's impossible or even difficult to find an automated solution to this issue at the slots machines. All these slots pay out by a ticket. They don't pay out by cash anymore. And I don't know why the machine can't be programmed on a win of $600 or more simply to deduct the amount that it pays out and give the bettor the option of either going to the cash out table, giving a taxpayer ID number, and getting a new ticket that pays the full amount and then is required to pay later, or just walk out of the casino with the cash less the 5% withholding anonymously. So in bottom line, I don't see why there's not an automated solution to this. That would solve the flow problem. The equity problem and the competitive problem, I don't know where the assumptions come from. I hear it. I've heard episodic data about it. I don't know where the assumptions come from, that this would be a huge competitive disadvantage. And thirdly, the statute says we are, we have to evaluate and look at and ensure that there is lottery protection in what we do. And if we have a rule that allows more with unreported, puts the withholding threshold at a higher level than the lottery, I'm concerned that we may be encouraging a shift of dollars from the lottery to us, or appear to be doing that. So for those three reasons, insofar as slots are concerned, I am not persuaded that this is the best idea. Table games, the federal model is the only one that makes any sense.
Pari-mutuel?
Pari-mutuel, I would put in the same camp. I would not be in favor of that.
In favor
I
of
would
what?
not be in favor of raising the limit to $1,200.
The lottery is a very different business model. The problem that we have with the $600 in the slot machines here is that there would be any payment, and you alluded to this, Mr. Chairman, as to how to interpret that. Any return payment, whether it's before the player cashes out the ticket or whether it's after the player cashes out the ticket, could be construed, I'm not suggesting that it should, but could be construed as a taxable event if it's more than $600. The problem with that is in a machine, that's easy with a $1 ticket, on the lottery ticket. The problem with the machine is that there are any number of spins or that may have led you to a point where you are at a loss, at which point any payment may be a taxable event when it's not intended.
No, but you may be absolutely right. And I may be convinced that this isn't the solution. But it seems to me, as a programming matter, you could set up the machine so that and each game is a separate event, a separate taxable event, let's say. Each time there's a payout of over $600 or over, the machine notes that, and on the payout coding, deducts the 5% from that $600 taxable event. And if you don't have any more, you play 100 games, you have one taxable event where you get the withholding. That's what's recorded on the ticket when you check out. So it seems to me that could be done.
If that solution was possible,
Why wouldn't
the
they be doing
industry
it?
do it for any?
At
for anybody?
1,200?
Well,
For
I can think of a
1,200?
number of ways why they wouldn't be doing it. The customers don't like it.
No, but now
Which
they
is-
have to stop the game. The machine freezes up, and a person walks over to them and makes them fill out a W-2G.
Yeah.
And if there were an easy mechanical way to solve that, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think we should ask the question, but logically, they hate doing that.
Yep.
The guy knows that it takes 15 minutes per person to do it.
Yeah.
So
Well-
if whatever the technological solution is, it would apply wherever the threshold is.
And if frankly, if we could answer that question in that way, if logic is in fact at work instead of something else,
Right.
then I would join this, but
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that question.
You were getting to the point, which is the crux of the matter. The players don't like it. That's it.
But
That the Massachusetts would be at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
If they get a payout lesser than other states, they might come here one day and decide that they don't like to be withheld automatically or by 1099-G of their winnings and decide not to come back.
Yeah, I hear you, and I'm just not convinced that they don't like it enough to go to Rhode Island instead of come here, and I just have difficulty with the idea that we cater to people who don't like paying taxes as a business model.
So they have been paying taxes 49% on every time they spend. The state gets a lot more by the taxes it collects on gross gaming revenues.
I think we just disagree on that. I'd like to get an answer to my question,
Yeah.
and if
Okay,
we can
so-
do that,
Mr. Chairman, there is a partial answer to Commissioner McHugh's, and I just want to weigh in real quick is.
there's an actual answer to this.
Well,
That
it's not.
destroys the fun.
It's not, it's a close answer to the
Right.
question, but as we've discussed machine standards, one thing that would end up happening, because it would be a unique development or a unique feature of Massachusetts machines, it would make it more difficult to supply the market for Massachusetts. Now, that would most likely delay the ability of manufacturers to get machines here, but it would also be something we want to consider, I think, as developers and manufacturers are looking to actually supply the market itself. So it's just a note that we have heard. Doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means that they would likely make the machine itself and its equipment unique compared to other states and the bigger markets.
But it's something about, but if, that would be true if it were only Massachusetts, but if Commissioner McHugh's instinct is right, that there ought to be some way to program all the machines to, in effect, do the withholding in an automated fashion, whatever the threshold number is at, over time, that issue could go away. And I think the question he's raising is one we need to get an answer to in any event.
We will explore it in more detail.
Yeah, right, okay. So, do I have a sense, it's probably even 5 of us, but certainly 4 of us, to go ahead, check into the answer to this question, flesh this out, flesh this whole approach out, and tee something up that we can look at as soon as we can get around to it, to bring to the legislature, whatever eventual version that is.
Yeah,
You
I'm
okay
on
with that?
board with that, and I would just add thinking about whether to include in that the deductibility of losses, because I join you in thinking that is hugely unfair. Maybe too much to bite.
Well, it's in my
it.
proposal.
Okay.
And it's in the federal rules. We're saying mirror the federal rules, so
Right.
that
Right.
would be part of it.
All right.
Okay, thank you. I will follow through on that. I have to excuse myself. Commissioner McHugh will take over the meeting for the next however long it takes.
Thank you for the work on this,
Oh,
Mr. Chair.
Yes,
Pleasure.
no,
Thank you.
this is very helpful.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you, folks.
All right. Director Day, are we finished with your section? It looks to me like we may be.
That would be correct with my reading as well.
All right. We're on the same page, as it were. And we are left with 2 items. The Legal Division's report and the licensing report. So let's, General Counsel Blue is poised and ready to go. Director Acosta is in the on-deck circle. And so let's go in that fashion.
He went back to get a bat.
Pardon me?
He went back to get a bat.
You went back to get it back?
Yeah. All right.
Okay. As the commission may recall, we talked previously about applicants who participated in Regions A and B, or perhaps in the slots, then being allowed to go into Region C, and they would not have to pay the additional $400,000 fee, assuming they were already found suitable and investigated, but they would have to cover the cost of any additional investigation or any investigation of any additional partners that they had. But they didn't necessarily have to meet that September 15th date that we had. Director Wells and I have been getting a number of sort of hypothetical questions as to what the commission might think about not just applying that rule to what we would call unsuccessful applicants, but perhaps to qualifiers who were deemed suitable and had gone through the suitability process but then now would like to become applicants in Region C. And I asked the commission to think about the fact that in terms of qualifiers, our qualifiers ranged in type from individuals all the way up to potentially operators who may not have been the applicant on that application. So the question that we would like the commission to consider is whether the commission would consider a qualifier that had been deemed suitable and had gone through the suitability process. Would they be allowed to participate in Region C as an applicant, assuming that they paid any additional expenses for investigations to update their investigation or any additional partners that they might have, even though they did not file by September 15th?
Yes, the Region C deadline was,
I think September 15th for the RFA 1.
but just to review the bidding here for a minute, the only people who were exempt from the September 15 deadline, well, this really poses the question, were the only people who, the baseline rule was that you had to file an application by January 15 to participate in this process, right?
That's correct.
Except for Region C, and we said you had to file an application by September 15, and waived the January 15 deadline for those who had filed and gone through the process. Is that, I mean,
Yes.
that's, I know this question puts into play what I've just said to some extent. But historically, that's what we've done.
No, the deadline that we waived was the September 15 for those who were already in.
Yeah, and those
Yes.
who are already in, at least the way we've thought about it up to this point, were those who were in by January 15.
That's correct.
Right.
Now, but the question, if I could rephrase, if you didn't already mention this, Council, was whether that decision then or now applied to applicants or qualifiers,
That's
Right.
what's in
or
here.
both.
For both.
So if I can understand this better, what I think you're saying is, for example, if there were a partner that, doesn't matter what the name would be, but say a landowner and an operator, and all were qualified, certainly to go to Region C, it would not be the same landowner because that's no longer viable, it's not in the right region, but the operator would be looking, and all of their folks have been qualified, correct? Is that an example of a scenario that you might be referring to?
That would be a possible scenario, is a situation where there was an applicant. An applicant consisted maybe of a couple of entities, some individuals, an operator. That applicant was maybe in the name of the individual, for example. That one of the people that was qualified, and they may or may not have been part of that application as of January 15th, but they went through the suitability process. They were investigated, they came before the commission, they were deemed to be suitable. Could one of those other folks who wasn't the named applicant then come into Region C without having to file by September 15th or pay the additional $400,000 fee? Assuming that anyone that came in with them, a landowner, other potential entity partners or individual partners, went through the IEB process and those fees for the investigation were paid.
We've dealt with the waiver question with respect to Region C once. We've dealt with it and allowed migration in the Plainville case and the Suffolk Downs case. Have we done it elsewhere?
I think those are the two.
And we
Most
talked about standards in connection with both of those cases. And my recollection is that we allowed applicants,
Yes.
quote unquote, to move ad lib if their application has been in by January 15th.
Yes.
But we've never extended it to anyone other than applicants. We've never been asked to, but we never have. And I don't remember how we framed what we were doing and why precisely. I know
Yeah.
what the result was, but and it seems to me we ought to know that before we make a decision here.
My recollection was that when we talked about this Region C ability to move from one region to another, was fundamentally for the desire and goal of competition, fundamentally. And the next natural extension, in my view, is not just allow applicants, but the probability of people who, individuals or entities that have already been qualified to move into any capacity into the other region for the same clearly worthy goal of increasing competition.
But that would require a modification of our regulations, would it not? Our regulation says that you, in order to participate, you had to file an application by January 15th.
Which all qualifiers, members of an applicant, effectively did.
That's being pretty plastic with the word applicant.
Is there hypothetically the opportunity for a qualifier under an applicant name that was in by January 15th, using that applicant name to carry a proposal forward? I'm worried. I agree with Commissioner Zuniga. I'm looking for competition in that region, regardless of what we decide to do. But I'm worried about the challenge of the applicant's legal standing if it's a completely different makeup. If the qualifier, just say there's 4 other parties to the application, the applicant, and the other 3 withdraw out of that entity, and there's 1 person left in that entity, I could see that person going forward. But if it's a different name, if it's again, I'm worried about the legal standing of quote unquote a new applicant.
Well, the example that Commissioner Cameron was talking about, I think, is very, very real. If we're only going to view an applicant as all the components of an application, and that included, say, a landowner, then for all intents and purposes, the applicant may not be able to move. Unless the landowner became landowner elsewhere as well.
In certain circumstances, because all of our applicants were organized in different ways, in certain circumstances, it might be possible for the applicant name to sort of travel with a given number of the qualifiers, maybe not all. But there are also certain qualifiers that may want to become applicants on their own, and that would be, you know, one of the questions for the commission to consider. There may be applicants who feel that they could be an applicant on their own. They weren't necessarily the named applicant going forward in another application, but they were a qualifier and they believe that they are, you know, competent to take an application forward.
But as we viewed suitability, and we've always kind of left the window open on suitability because we didn't know who would be in at some point and who might pull out at some point. If a qualifier is interested in being an applicant and has been found suitable, and other parties who probably were also found suitable decide, I'm not interested in moving ahead with the project as it might be redefined or reproposed. Again, I personally would rather see the qualifier carry the name of that applicant as we had it by January 15th, regardless if the property owner drops out, whatever the makeup changes. And we certainly leave ourselves open to a new party coming in and a new party having to go through the IEB background. But I'm just worried the legal standing changes if it's a new name.
But what if it wouldn't be possible to use that name? For example, if it was the name of the folks that put the land deal together and they are no longer involved, so that wouldn't really be possible to use that name moving forward. I just wonder if we're
Thank
being
you.
hung up on a name rather than a qualified entity, and I can't think of where allowing this would put anyone else at a competitive disadvantage. I hear what you're saying about the legal,
I'm just worried about the legal challenge to
yeah, what is our,
that applicant.
Well, we have been very clear all along that the applicant is the person whose name is on the application, and that applicant needed to stay the same through the process. We knew that people would move in and out, but the applicant itself would be the same. We understood individuals would move in and out. We understood that the real estate underneath it might move in and out if those folks were qualifiers. But we have had that position all along, and that tracks our regulations when we talk about applicants.
But applicant is a defined term in the statute, and it's defined as the person who has applied for a license to engage in activity regulated under this chapter. And person means entity in this context. So an applicant is the person who's applied for a license. The qualifiers have not necessarily applied for a license. And we said that the applications by the applicants had to be filed by January 15. So it seems to me we have to change the reg if we're going to allow qualifiers who have not been applicants to file an application to participate in Region C. Now, I guess I would like to ask how necessary is it to decide this issue today? Because I would really think we'd all benefit from a look at the, I'm doing this statutory analysis on the fly. It seems to me that that's the answer, but it may not be. And I would like to know what we said in connection with the other two. I would like to have a statutory and regulatory analysis looking at the statutory definition of applicant and have us all take a look at the fruits of that before we made a decision, because I share Commissioner Stebbins' concern that we open ourselves to at least a claim that we are now changing the rules completely and unfairly in one region when we haven't done it in others, and haven't allowed others to come into play perhaps here as well. So I think we need to be consistent and deliberate. And if we could get that and put this on for the next meeting, we could answer the question, unless there's some greater urgency.
No, I think that of paramount importance is to get the correct answer, and I
Right.
think that's what all the, the questions I'm getting, Catherine's getting, they
Right.
just would like a definitive answer and have the correct
Right.
answer so they can plan accordingly. From the IEB's side of the house, it's, we have, a schedule that we're looking to meet for the commission. And we would just caution these applicants that the burden's on them to, get your partners together, get the information to the IEB. You've got to move this along, and you can't come in at the 11th hour with half your application. We can't
Right.
do that in a month. So as long as the potential applicant, for Region C are aware of that, we're happy to work with them. And I think everyone's in agreement that we'd like the correct answer.
Right.
when you're saying a qualifier, there's more than one request, I take it, to this question? Is it an entity we're talking about, not an individual?
Well, it's not like Joe Smith is going to come in and say,
Yeah.
I got
Well,
qualified and I'd like to build a casino. That just wouldn't work within the process. I mean,
So
it's
it's
just
an
not
entity,
practical.
a significant portion of a prior application, right, that now would like to move forward?
It could be a significant portion, it could be less than a significant portion, but it could be someone who's capable of operating a gaming establishment. So I doubt that it would be an individual, I agree with Director Wells, but it could be a lesser combination. I think the key question is it clearly is not the applicant. That's the one thing that we have in common with the questions that we've received. It's not someone who you would look at and say, this was a prior applicant who filed in January. But and the other key component is that these folks have all been through suitability and been found suitable. So, we brought it to the commission because we wanted to get some discussion and initial thought. We can certainly go back and do statutory and regulatory review on that to see, how that plays out, but.
And I think we should do that, but isn't, for all intents and purposes, every applicant that came into both deadlines, certainly the first one, was a special purpose entity created only for the purpose of applying for a licensing process, without any operations, without any history of revenues.
Mm-hmm.
They were completely wholly owned subsidiaries of many other entities.
By and
So-
large, yes.
Right. And by many owners in different passions, etc. So in my view, anyway, taking a narrow look at the applicant, Massachusetts LLC Gaming, or whatever it was, misses the point of how it's owned by the multiple entities that operate, run, and wholly owned subsidiaries. So I look forward to that analysis. I think it's important, but I think it's a very narrow view if we only look at the one entity that was the one created for the sole purposes of applying.
But also view it, we had a perfect example this morning. We had Blue Tarp LLC. Well, we equate the project in Springfield as MGM. So, I want us to be, we've always talked about encouraging competition. I think we've seen the benefits of competition when we've, said the playing field is equal for everybody. But, and I don't want to take away from that. I think we want competition in Regency, again, regardless of what we decide to do. But finding a way for that specific entity to change form, it just seems to me, it sounds like some, legal or corporate maneuverings to position a qualifier under an applicant as the new applicant. And again, the new parties come together. It's still the same name that was submitted to us by January 15th. It's just different people in the mix. But I want to make sure that that individual or that applicant isn't challenged, and ultimately we're challenged on a legal basis.
Nobody's suggesting we shouldn't honor the competitive impulses, or that we don't do better for the Commonwealth by having competition. Nobody's arguing that. On the other hand, this is not entirely plastic, and we can't simply move aside either existing law or regulations without changing what we can, if in order to serve some greater goal. So, and we get in trouble if we do that. So, it seems to me that we ought to figure out what the law is, what the regulations are, what the statute says, how the two mesh together, and then if you can't get there without changing changing the regulation, we can't change the statute. Without changing the regulation, then we ought to debate changing the regulation. And that's all I'm suggesting at this stage.
So we will go back and do that analysis, and we will bring it back to the commission for your further review.
Okay. Do you want to make a personnel announcement as long as you're there?
Oh, yes. I would like to announce and let everyone know that Loretta Lilios is joining the legal department. She will be working predominantly with the IEB, but also in the general legal department as well. And we are very glad to have her here. So I think she's still
Welcome.
here. Yes,
Welcome.
she's-
Like to second that.
I think I've known Loretta for quite a while, and had the pleasure of working with her and watching her work, and she will be a great asset to our team, and already has been an enormous asset to the team. And I'm delighted that she's elected to join us, I think will benefit immensely from that. So
Great
welcome.
to have you, Loretta.
Yeah,
Great to
I
have
echo
you on
that.
board. There were more people
Welcome.
in the room earlier, but they all left, waiting for the announcement.
Right.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Okay, is that it?
That's all we have?
Council, all right. Let's then move on to item 5 on the agenda. Director Acosta.
Commissioners, before you, there's a bullet presentation. It's an update on the licensing management system. 4 points that I want to make. EMC Documentum platform selected for the enterprise content management procurement was done in November of 2013. The statement of work that was executed with NTT Data was done in December 13 for the development of the licensing management system. The important thing that I want to point out here is that the go-live date for the licensing management system is scheduled for early May. When we first made presentation, we were expecting to have a go-live date probably in late March. This has been changed for several reasons, and the 2 prior points are part of that. We're expecting applications from gaming vendors to start coming in sometime in March. We've met with representative of the Gaming Vendor Association, and they've indicated to us there are a number of vendors that are going to be applying, and that probably by mid-March, the application should start coming in. Between the March receiving of those applications, anticipated receiving of those applications, and the go-live date, we are going to be establishing a system in which an interim business process system where we would post the applications in a system where it could be accessible to IEB. We would track who the individuals are applying, and once the go-live date, all that information will be transferred, whether it be done automatically or automatedly, or it's done manually to the system once we go live. Those are the big points. We are on schedule. You will see that there is an attachment as to the licensing management system updates. We have received already a business statement that staff is currently reviewing and providing some comments on. We're very excited as to what this licensing management system is going to do, especially in the first phase. I'm looking forward to being part of this.
Could you explain that all sounds very, very optimistic and encouraging. Could you just explain lightly what this licensing management system chart is? What does it show? Particularly the diagonal line for regulations. Is that just noting that the regulations?
Yeah, it's really, it's
We
just
already
calling
heard the
out that that was the meeting at which we expected the regulations to be approved by the commission, and then they could be promulgated. And I think the finalization of the regulations were pretty important to the functioning of the underlying system, some of the business rules and things.
Okay, so that's just a noting an historical
It's a call
event
out.
that's already.
Yeah, the rest of the chart is basically the
Projection.
timeline for the development and the configuration of the application, along with some of the major deliverables that we're expecting
Right. Okay.
during the process.
Okay. Okay, that's great. That's great. Well, this looks great. Questions, comments? No action items required. This is just, we're on course and steady
Just inform me
sailing.
where we at right now.
Yeah, it's great, great.
And Director Acosta, you are familiar with, this would be your third licensing management system, would that be correct?
Yeah, that, when I started in New Jersey, we were doing things paper.
I understand, yeah. But when you
So-
left, there was a system in place?
It was automated, yes.
And then in Ohio as well?
That is correct.
How would this
Um,
system compare to those other systems, in your educated opinion?
The other systems, very simply, they're antiquated, and I don't want to say that in a negative way, but this will be a state-of-the-art, and it'll be a comprehensive system that will bring a number of functions together that in other jurisdictions are all separate, which creates problems in itself. And we're, taking this best practices from my other experiences and putting this all under one roof, one platform. We have new technology. We're starting off new. It's not like we're having to scrap an old stuff to start new one, because that can be a little bit more difficult.
Yes.
I know the state of Ohio is currently doing that, and it's a great undertaking. So I'm looking forward to this. We've already been approached by other jurisdictions as to how we're doing this and why we're doing this, and this may be a model that may be used by other jurisdictions in the very near future.
Can we
Impressive.
sell it?
I spoke to my counterpart here, and that's the first thing that came out of it. So let's-
My thought is we may be able to share some of the cost if somebody wants to use it,
Yeah.
so recoup some of the cost.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You saw our budget presentation. That might be helpful.
David and John, you have the staff, we have the contractors on site, NTT Data. I believe you found them to be basically professionals and keep on task and work and cooperate with staff.
So the quality of the work so far is outstanding. The two deliverables, which we have in hand and are reviewing, are also outstanding, so we're very happy with the work so far.
There are 6 members of NTT Data currently in our offices on a daily basis. We meet with them at least once a week, in addition to one-on-one conversations with them, just to review status of the project, some of the changes, some of the difficulties, some of the complexities that come up. So it's been a real strong interaction between NTT Data staff that are there on a daily and regular basis, and licensing as well as John as well. And I cannot go without mentioning that IAB has had a very strong interest and participation in this process as well.
So IAB is obviously going to use this system as well as you.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
IAB is a very integral
Right.
part of the system. All of the functionalities of IAB will be part of the system.
Yeah,
Investigations will feed.
Correct.
yeah.
Excellent, thank
Sounds
you.
like it's going to be first class.
Actually, you were already touching on this, but how, I'm curious about the user acceptance and user input throughout the development process. How would you characterize that? Very interactive, or at different chunks, or we wouldn't want to get to a point of user acceptance and then have people say, well, this isn't really what we wanted. Have there been steps taken to sort of mitigate that?
Yes, licensing staff are not technicians. We're more from the practical user side. IB staff are not technicians, they're more from the user side. And we've been presenting our positions as users from other systems as to what worked, what didn't work, and let the technicians handle the technical part of it and try to get it together and to make a very viable system. So we're pretty happy with that interaction that we've had so far.
Yeah, I would add that it's an iterative approach. So the first deliverable is a business requirements document which articulates what the flow is and the actually NTT's understanding of what we've told them we want. And that document kind of informs us for the next steps, and that will lead to the functional requirements. So at each step along the way, there's a review by our staff and an opportunity to comment and provide them feedback within a 5-day period. So it builds. And I think the quality of the initial documents will lead to a better end product. In any kind of software development, the work put in up front, articulating requirements and defining them well, leads to a better product in the end. So I think we've started well, and we'll take this iteratively. The next step is screenshots and some prototyping where people will begin to, if you don't understand a business flow diagram, which is what's contained in some of the initial documents, the screenshots will take the users through, you know, the experience and what the flow actually is. So I'm pretty confident that, you know, between the work of the technical team at NTT Data and the subject matter expertise of our in-house staff, that we're going to do very well.
Great.
Also, customization, something that can get out of hand in a process like this. Hopefully time and milestones is an important driver. What's the level of customization that you see happening, and how is that managed?
So I think we're taking a foundational system and we're configuring it. It will meet all of our requirements, and I think additional, even talk about customization, do you mean, it's not like we're buying a software application and changing it. We're actually building a workflow process using the Documentum platform. So it will be purpose-built to our specs to intake documents and to move things through our process, as we say. I think the issue is sustaining it, and I think I'm talking with Director Day about staffing so that we can get into the business of maintaining what we've built, you know, post delivery of the system by NTT Data. So I'm not too concerned about customization per se.
And the project costs are reflected in the budget numbers that we have.
Yes, yeah. As a matter of fact, you have a separate call-out sheet that specifies the individual costs for this project, and we will track those on time, on budget at this time.
Great.
Other questions, thoughts?
Nice job.
All right,
Yeah,
sounds great.
thank you.
Good.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thank you.
Anything else? Looks like we're done. Motion, appropriate motion at